Brandon Joe Williams is a lawyer who is a human pickle that teaches others how to move out of the country on paper without physically moving out of the country. Brandon, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. This is a long time coming. This is first and foremost, I want to say thank you so much for everything you've done, because you are sort of like the gateway to all the things that are happening with me.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
And you and Luke, who was introduced to me via you. So really, it's ultimately you, but Luke has been very, very helpful as well. But all of this is because of you, and I really just can't appreciate it.
That.
So appreciate it.
Well, no, it's not. I wouldn't say it's because of me. I mean, like, I found you because of the good work you're doing.
I understand, but there hasn't been anyone who's picked me up. You're the first guy who's sort of picked me up in a big way, and you asked me what I wanted, and I told you, and you turned around and did it, which is like, wow, okay, this is just like shocking, to me. It's like I've been flying solo for a long time. I've, everything, all my social and professional, everything has been kind of burned to the ground from all this. So, very appreciated and very fun. And I'm having an absolute blast out of my mind. So
that's good.
You.
That's good. We're supposed to be having an absolute blast. So it's good. We're going to start a little bit differently than you've done on some of the other podcast episodes. And I'll probably throw Luke's in the show notes because it was such a good episode with him. And I know you just recorded a second one with him.
The second one with him is just, by the way, it's a totally different, and it goes into a lot of like my own thoughts and ideas and a lot of things that I can't necessarily show super easily.
Right.
So that's going to be a whole nother really cool kind of offshoot. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll throw those in the show notes, but I want to do this one a little bit differently because you've gotten in your groove and you've done a bunch of shows, and like you said, you could throw a freaking brick and it would land on one of your shows where you've talked about it in that way. So I want to take this one a little bit differently, but I think before we get there, I want to ask, like, we're talking about common law and status correction and the nature of our relationship with the U.S. government. That's the meta concepts that we're going to cover here. What led you to discover this stuff in the first place, especially as a Juris Doctorate, formerly trained in law from the statutory side? So, like, how did you find yourself here doing this stuff?
I had a landscaping company that I took over for free. It was all messed up with a buddy of mine. And the Employment Development Department, which is essentially the payroll mafia police of California, decided they wanted to trespass onto one of my job sites and just kind of cook up this $50,000 or $60,000 bill or whatever it was. And that's kind of how I had a lady who was trying to tell me about a lot of this information for about 2 years. And I just did what most people do, which is I was envisioning the CIA coming down in helicopters and swinging through, well-dressed, well-uniformed, strong men, with their heads shaved and their helmets on and their camouflage and the whole 9 yards. And
so you didn't have like the typical dudes in black suits vision. You had like dudes in military garb, like coming. I had rappelling out of helicopters.
Yeah. I had the helicopter. Yeah, I had the skylight. I don't have a skylight, but for some reason the skylight was part of it. So that was kind of interesting. It's like, okay, skylights come out of nowhere. Okay. But like I had the same experience that a lot of people have for 2 years. I mean, there's just no way. I would talk to her and it was kind of fun. It was kind of interesting, but it was just like,
there's no way this is actually the truth.
No. It wasn't that. It was, there's no way in hell I'm doing this.
Oh, got it. So it all made sense to you.
Yeah,
even wasn't from your like formally trained in law perspective.
I was never formally trained in law. No,
you were never formally trained in law. Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
No, I have zero. Like when I say zero, I mean like I don't even have like barely even tickets or anything. Like,
got it.
The deepest into law I ever got was I got a ticket one time, and in California, I went online to help-I-got-a-ticket.com. And I filed like it was called a trial by declaration.
Got it.
And it was like really, really, really super basic, super stupid. I stand by my my plea of not guilty. You just write that on, I think it's like an MCS 150 or something.
Got it.
And you just go to the court and you submit that with the payment.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the police officer doesn't turn in something like on the record or whatever, then you get it. And I won because he never responded. And then I got my money back That's the most literally like that was to
that
me
makes
like
sense
the most
why
mind-blowing
you
thing.
don't and never would have been able to have a bar card. That gives more context. Okay,
Yeah, never had a bar card, never was involved with the bar, never went to law school, never thought in my whole life I would ever be doing anything with. My first love and my first real profession was I was a Cisco certified network technician. So I was actually a computer networking engineer.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I went to school for music theory.
Okay.
So that's actually my actual background.
Got it. Okay. Do you play any instruments?
Oh yeah.
What do you play?
I played drums. I used to scream in a metal band. I used to.
Okay.
Yeah. I play guitar. I used to teach music theory to children.
Dude, I would have hired you as an artist for Confluence. We have a bunch of artists. I should have known that.
I don't play a ton anymore, but there'll be some Bonfire. Give me an acoustic guitar.
We'll
go crazy.
Confluence. I see it happen. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll do some offstage.
Okay, cool.
Music on
we
my
have
part.
some bonfires at Confluence.
Yeah, we'll do some Bonfire. That I'll be very good at that because I don't play a ton like I used to, you know. It's
Makes
like
sense.
it used to be my whole life. I was like imagining myself as the rock star, you know. And then with this, I just kind of like I don't have anywhere near as much of an interest in it as I used to, but still pretty good at it.
So it was this lady, right? This lady.
Yeah, her name is Nancy Kramer.
Uh-huh.
She was actually running the California Assembly. She was living in Studio City. She doesn't anymore. I think she moved to like South Dakota or something.
Mm-hmm.
She went on like a whole ranch or whatever. So she's not even in California anymore, to my knowledge. But she was going around and hobnobbing with all the politicians, and she was like highly, highly, highly active in the political scene, mainstream political scene.
Got it.
And she was a client of mine at this dental office that I had. I was running the dental office, and every time she came in, she would very, very sweetly and very kindly and very softly introduce the subject again and say, you know, this and that, and I would say, you know, F the taxes, or I would say this, or I would say that, you know, all the key words, you know, all the key phrases, and she was always like very, very socially proficient in terms of like she was always kind of, she would hear those specific phrases come out of my mouth. She wouldn't introduce the subject or reintroduce the subject until, you know, and I was one of those kinds of people. It's funny. I think one of the reasons why I connect with people so well is because I was one of those people screaming about Trump and saying that he's the greatest thing and that he needs to. I was one of those people, like Max. I didn't have a platform. I had a very, very, very small group of fans based off of the books that I had written and published. I published one book on how to set up really, really unique marketing and sales systems inside of a business.
Whoa.
It's the whole free course.
I remember you said that actually.
Yeah, it's called Don't Be a Slave to Your Clients, Break Your Chains, and Regain Your Sanity. It's all about creating a free course and then creating paid ads and then flowing the paid ads into the free course.
Wait, so Don't Be a Slave, that domain came before any of this?
Yeah.
Oh my.
That was my first.
How funny that it applies to this as well.
I know.
It's so crazy.
I know.
Wow.
And that was the name of my first book. Yeah. So
and then you have another book, Love is a Battery.
Love is a Battery. Yeah.
Okay.
So as I started, I was involved in sales and marketing for 12 years or maybe even, well, at this point now, I mean, basically since like 2010, essentially, professionally. And as I got deeper and deeper into sales and marketing, I read a lot of things. I read a lot of different people, hundreds and hundreds of books, everything you can possibly think of, right? And then I read a book, the only sales book I've ever read by a woman. And it was a book called Uncensored Sales Strategies by Sydney Biddle-Barros. And it completely, totally shifted everything. And she defines sales as one of three categories: brute force, consensual, or romance. And she teaches how to turn your entire sales and marketing lines and your entire business into this romantic seduction endeavor.
Wow.
And she ran the biggest escort service in all of New York City from like 1986 through like 1996 or something like that. And it's very, obviously, very sexually oriented, the book, right? And it just completely, it's by far, and I mean like by far, basically, in my world, it's the sales and marketing Bible. It's the best thing.
Wow.
I ended up basically just taking almost everything I had learned from almost every sales and marketing course ever and just tossing it in the nearest trash can in my own mind.
Wow.
And that's when I realized that seduction is sales.
Wow.
Sales is seduction. Or if you want to go down the brute force, you can essentially emotionally rape people all day long. And then they refund and then they unclose. And then it's this constant stressful thing. And you're drinking coffee and you see all the memes.
And then you don't feel good yourself.
You feel like trash. And it's just like, and then it becomes part of the culture. And then now you're making memes about, sales isn't that hard. I'm 26 years old. And it's a picture of a guy who's 89 years old.
Yeah.
Which are funny, by the way. But when you convert everything into a more of a seduction-based system, it was the most fulfilling, amazing. I mean, my clients just loved me, and Nancy, obviously, anyone who came into my office, which was mainly women above the age of 65. I mean, I was in love with these women, literally. I mean, I couldn't help myself because that's part of what I'm doing now as a person setting up these systems as per, Sydney's recommendation, Sydney B. Del Barro. So that was the impetus that caused me to write Love's a Battery.
Got it. Okay.
Which is all about, basically, it's about a relation. It's a relating love and seduction to the actual physics operation of batteries. You have the two terminals, you have the base that holds them apart from each other because there's a magnetic flow that will occur. And it's two poles of opposite potential production of energy. And then you have the electrolyte that goes in between the two. And I relate all of that to seduction and men and women and social environments. And so it's a really, I think it's fascinating. And it's probably the only thing in the world that I could talk about more than the law.
Would you have ever thought that at that time when you wrote that, you'd be teaching common law?
Oh God. There's nothing. I mean, I would probably assume I would be in Australia training dogs before I would assume.
Right.
Which I don't.
Like the most
I've
random
never
thing
been
ever.
in. Yeah, I've never been involved in Australia or dogs.
Starting point guard on an NBA team.
Sure, it's just like one of those things where you could have never in a million years guessed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So this lady tipped you off to it and you started looking into it and you're like, no way in hell am I going to do this. Where did it turn from? And no way in hell am I going to even do this myself to...
I didn't even really want to know that much about it. I mean, it was like a full stop.
Right.
It was like I'll listen to a few things because it's like so fascinating, but like, I don't even really want to... So she would invite me over, and I would literally be like, no, like I no, thank you very much. You're amazing, Nancy. Thank you so much. I love you so much. But no, not happening.
So where did it shift for you? What
EDD?
Was the
Employment Development Department, because they were gonna wipe us out.
Wow.
Fully.
Okay.
We were gonna be gone.
So what did you dive into first?
Nancy.
Okay, so Nancy had a lot of knowledge.
Went straight to Nancy's house.
Okay.
I think literally the next day I called Tracy, my business partner. Now, Tracy is very funny. So Tracy is this gigantic, at his peak, he was bench pressing 500 pounds. He is like a black belt in like 3 or 4 different martial arts. He is probably one of the most terrifying individuals on the planet. But if he's your friend, he's the number one friend you could ever have in your entire life. Last guy you'd ever want on the other side of the table on the planet. Number one guy you'd want on your side of the table. Kind of a guy, right? One punch and he will probably destroy your entire rib cage. So he basically told me, you need to figure this out. We need to figure this out. Failure is not an option. Terrifying. I mean, coming from him, and he's just like, we're not dying. This isn't happening. Yeah. So what are you gonna do, and what are we gonna do to figure this out, right? And that's when I said, well, and I'm thinking in my head, everything under the sun, moon, and stars. And I'm thinking, I know this girl, Nancy, who's been trying to tell me about this crazy ass, I don't even know what it is stuff.
Yeah, I don't even know what to call it at this point.
And he's like, I've been wanting to learn that for a long time. But no one's ever been able to really explain it very well. And I said, well, I don't know if she knows or he's like, you're going to call her right now and you're going to set up an appointment for tomorrow at 3 p.m. Like, really? And he's like, yes, call her right fucking now. Like, boom, boom, boom. Right. And so I like picked up the phone and I just called her and I said, hey, my friend Tracy and I would like to come and see you. And we go over there and she had at that time, she was involved with the Anna von Reitz crowd, which she's not now. She has nothing to do with that now. And they were doing this like 928 package or something. I don't really know what it was. And she had us do some documents and take some photos, and she had the whole thing set up to process everything. And Tracy was like, yeah, this is so cool, blah, blah, blah. And he like called his friend, and his friend came, and he was like, yeah, let's go. And I'm sitting in the corner looking down at the ground, and like literally I am so nervous and so terrified that like time ceased to exist. I was like seeing visions. I was like literally like in like a hallucinogenic trance. I was so scared.
Oh yeah.
And I was literally like moving forward and signing the documents and doing the thumbprints like in like such terror in my mind. And I was just so lost and so scared and so confused that like it's like a blackout in my memory.
Right. Especially if you're just brand new to any of this stuff and you immediately start into a bunch of processes like that without any context or, good baseline knowledge on what is happening. That can be very scary. And I can kind of see why the whole like vision of helicopters and dudes coming to snatch you up thing, was ingrained into your psyche. So
Tracy was a big part of it because Tracy's the kind of guy where even if I tried to leave, like I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Sit the fuck down right now. Literally, right?
Thank God for Tracy, right?
Yeah. So honestly, if it wasn't for Tracy, who's listed on Williams and Williams law firm, he's a part of my my mergers and acquisitions team, which is basically just me and him.
Mm-hmm.
Without him, none of this would have happened.
Wow.
So without Nancy, none of this would have happened. And without Tracy Barron, none of this would have happened.
And without this shitty situation.
And without the EDD. Thanks to EDD. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. That's why I always think thank you to COVID, right? Like it's all about what you make out of the situation. It's all about how you use it to transmute or alchemize into something even better. So okay, let's get into the context now. What you have learned, because clearly you've learned a lot. You have a course called the Contract Killer course. You have a number of resources on your website. You have different URLs for your website too. I'm gonna post one that says onestupidfuck.com because it's absolutely hilarious. But there's also the nicer one, Williams and Williams Law Firm, which then you can find some of the same information. It'll transition you over to One Stupid Fuck. But let's dig into some of the stuff that you learned. I think this one will be a historical context baseline education, and we'll probably get into some nitty-gritty details here and there as we feel called to. As you know, I've become I wouldn't consider myself nearly as knowledgeable as you, but we've had some conversations, and I would say that I know my shit, so to speak.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Part. Yeah. So but oddly enough, aside from just a couple of episodes, I've hardly touched on this on my public facing podcast. So this will be great. Obviously a lot of the stuff that I share for those that are listening and watching is related to how the so-called authority figures only have authority over us based on our own conditioned beliefs and contracts that we have unwittingly and sometimes wittingly engaged in with them. And that is the only way that they have, quote, authority or jurisdiction over us as men and women. So let's start with this. What happened around the time of the Civil War that set the precedent for there to be a federal, sort of corporate federal overlay on top of what were originally independent nations themselves as, what we call the, quote, 50 states in the United States of America?
Yeah. So if you look in the a lot of the old writings, and even I believe even in the Constitution and stuff, they always say the several independent states or the several independent sovereign states, or they may even use the word nation, because the word state and nation is basically you can use either word, which is a big part of my main presentation that I usually do on a lot of the basic shows. But basically what happened is right around that time period, so much happened. It was a Civil War, ending the Civil War, right? And right around that time period, around 1865, 66, 67, somewhere in there is when they redefined the word person. And they redefined the word person to include legal fictions such as estates, trusts, partnerships, associations, companies, and corporations. They also included in the definition of the term person, the term individual, right? And then what they started to do is they started to create these things called public corporations, where if you look in Black's Law under the word corporation, there's a section there called public corporation, which when I saw that, it blew my mind, because it was like, holy bleep, this is really what it is. It's not this straw man thing that everybody's talking about.
Everyone says you're straw man, but that's actually a misnomer.
Yeah, straw man, if you look at the definition of straw man in Cornell law, it says that it's a third party that essentially holds property and intermission for the sole purpose of exchanging it to another. I would actually consider the word strawman and the word escrow to be basically the same word or very similar.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So the thing is that the term public corporation is something I like a lot more, which means it's a corporation. It literally says, I think I know it verbatim. I can pull it up if I need to on my phone, but
at any point you feel the need to, so you can read the whatever U.S. code or code of federal regulations.
Because the thing is it's, I don't like to.
And what we'll try to do, and Nico, don't edit this out, because shout out to my editor, Nico. He's freaking awesome at what he does. What we'll try to do with this, most likely, if Nico feels that he can, anytime you pull up CFR or something from the UCC or a U.S. code, we'll just have Nico paste that on the screen for people to see.
Good, yeah, and I can go pretty fast with a lot of this stuff because I actually have good service here, unlike when I was at the other place.
Great.
So, so there's two terms that I really like to use with what occurred during that time. Public corporation. A public corporation is one created by the state for political purposes and to act as an agency in the administration of civil government. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's essentially like a portal or like a middle ground or like a relay station between, and then in 1871 they incorporated the government and they used that's when the public school system was born. And the public school system was essentially like the big beneficial aspect of the Organic Act of 1871 that was supposed to entice
Quote,
everyone
beneficial.
Into being, well, at first a lot of these things are.
Right. I could see, assuming that they had good intentions, which is an assumption, but assuming they had good intentions, I could see where maybe that sounded good at first.
Well, who knows? For all we know.
That's an assumption, though. That is an assumption on the intention.
For all we know, from 1871 until 1899, it was the greatest thing in the world. I don't know. I have no idea. No one knows. You know what I mean? So it's like.
But what it's evolved into, as
what it's
we
evolved
all
into,
know,
150 plus years later, it's evolved into this total nightmare.
Indoctrination camp where it's literally, well, this is where I don't want to get off on a tangent on education necessarily, but I don't know at what point this happened, but it is overtly stated that the Western public school systems, even the United States public school systems, Canada, and just a lot of westernized countries are based off of the Prussian education model. And the Prussian education model was intended to make children become obedient to the state. That's literally what they stated overtly in the Prussian education model. So that's what our public school systems are based off of. Now, I don't know if that's what happened at that time during the Organic Act, but at some point, either at the Organic Act or thereafter, that was what our public school systems were based off of. And you can see that. You can totally see that in society.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know a ton about that, but going through the public school system myself and being expelled multiple times, and
maybe that's why you landed here.
I have a whole backstory about that too. The state of Indiana wouldn't even accept me into public schools, but my mom couldn't afford a private school for me because I had been expelled so many times.
But now do you look back on that like as a good thing? Because it's clearly I was like not buying into this whole thing.
Absolutely hilarious. Exactly. I'm so proud.
Yeah, I'm proud of you too.
Thank you. I wrote a whole article about this actually to moms specifically, and I said that it's on my Williams & Williams law firm on the article section, and I said that the real issue is the straight A student that doesn't have any issues. That's when you've got a problem with your kid. And it's very, very sweet and kind of poetic, and it's like I've gotten literally thousands of thank you letters from moms and stuff. So my mom cried like crazy when she read it. It's not a thing, but the thing is that it was my own very fun, very hilarious kind of rebellion. I would make all this class clowns type stuff, and then they'd kick me out, and then I would joke and do this, and it wasn't anything violent or anything. It was just so much joking and so much like they couldn't teach the classes. So that's literally, it was just infraction after infraction after infraction, and it was just completely so intense and so much of that to the point where they literally couldn't teach the class, and that's how the expulsions took place, right? But my mom sued the state of Indiana, and then they took this therapy center and they converted it into a school, and it was literally just me and this kid named Mitchell, just two kids in the whole school, and all the teachers and the nurse, they were all martial arts trained, and Mitchell was quite a bit older than me. I think I was 8 and he was like 14, and he was big. and he was there because he's beating up kids and he gets really, really angry.
Got it.
Like prison level type.
Oh man.
So it was just me and him, and he's way bigger than me. So what happened was I ended up, hi Mitchell, how you doing? Good to see you, buddy. You need anything? You thirsty? You need anything? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, hey, first off, I'm the only social option you have. And second off, look at me. I'm not an enemy.
Yeah.
So a lot of that, like the Joker type personality was manufactured during that time period because Mitchell would have easily killed me.
Yeah.
Or at least seriously maimed me.
Right.
And I didn't want that to happen. And he was my only fellow. And then this guy named Richie came in and he had the same kind of anger issues, if not even worse. So I wound up basically in this school where I was just a class clown and I'm filled with essentially like hardcore, like MS-13 prison children, basically, right?
We're in Indiana, by the way. Near
this
Fort
was
Wayne?
Northwest Indiana, right by Gary.
Okay.
Not right by Gary, but kind of like very close. Maryville and Valparaiso is basically. Chesterton is where I literally was raised up until about 8 or 10. And then we moved to a small town called Hebron, which is in the middle of nowhere. Hebron is very, very close to Valparaiso.
Yeah. I played in AAU basketball tournaments growing up in Gary, Indiana. So I'm very familiar. Yeah.
So I was in this special school with all these anger-riddled kids and all the teachers and stuff were all martial arts trained. And if the kids decided they want to freak out and start swinging or breaking stuff, then there's this lady named Tina who had this giant mullet and she was like 80 pounds, but she would like literally throw you across the room. She would throw like a 200-pound 15-year-old across the room, like with zero effort. Like she was like basically like G.I. Jane essentially. And everyone respected her because she was really chill, super cool, very respectful, funny, amazing. But you push her and you push her and you push her and you push her and you're going flying.
Wow.
So Tina was like the main kind of, and it was just an amazing experience. I was only there for a couple of years and then I graduated out and then I went back into public school into the special ed classroom, but I wasn't really special ed. So I used to just use that as an advantage to cheat on all the exams and it's a whole story. But
you were gaming the system.
Like, I was gaming. Yeah, I'm not new to gaming the system.
Yeah, you figured out the loopholes in the system. So back to the Organic Act. So during the time of the Civil War, they redefined the term person, and that is to include estates, trusts, individuals, corporations, etc. Right? And so for the listeners, the context that's important here with respect to that is that this really is a huge step in setting the precedent for them to trick you into identifying with something that you are not. And what I mean by that is when you see your all caps name on any legal document, any government document, really any banking document too, they're not referring to you as a man or a woman, or in the law, we're talking about a natural person. Right, I tend to not like that, but I understand that
so some of the definitions do infer that the term natural person could possibly include artificial persons, and they literally say that almost verbatim. So I always tell people that, you can use the term natural persons and then you just put a little asterisk with a little bonus definition and you say does not include artificial persons for this definition.
And that's great.
I feel like when you do it that way, it's very clean and there's no backdoor and it can be used in a litigation situation or whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I like saying just man or woman.
I like it too. It's just that I'm trying to navigate like mainline litigation. So it's like I'm trying to use all the terminology in a way that doesn't inflate emotional reactions from anyone, including the judge, so I'm trying to
the leftist people who you made
everything. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out a way where I can like navigate these waters in the calmest fashion possible. So I'll take terms that they use all the time and just put a little whatever the little half circle symbol is, and I'll just put definition does not include artificial persons, and then end it. Yeah, and then just use the term natural person, and then it never sets off any bells. That's the term they use. Right.
At the same time, going back to the during the Civil War, just after that is when the 14th Amendment came into effect. And I don't want to say ratified because it was never actually ratified, which is so crazy. It was just like accepted, literally just like shoved.
I don't even know how.
I don't either. It's absolutely absurd.
It was probably just because during the Reconstruction, it was probably just such a mess,
Right.
and the government was restructuring, and it was just there was such a cloud cover of confusion that by the time all the smoke cleared, it was just like whatever,
Right.
basically,
So can you describe exactly what happened with the 14th Amendment, what that set the precedent for, and what that created?
So I try to tie everything down as much as I can to like exact historical. From my research so far, my very strong assumption as to how all this went down and why, based off of just a lot of circumstantial evidence and information that I've studied. Basically what happened is that they wanted to end slavery, but a lot of people didn't want to end slavery.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of slaves that didn't necessarily even want to end slavery because they're scared and they're kind of used to what they're doing.
They basically have Stockholm syndrome at that point too.
Right. Yeah. So you on both sides of the spectrum, it wasn't. So what they did is they passed this 14th Amendment, and I believe what happened is they passed the 14th Amendment because the people who were in the States didn't want the slaves to be, it's like, guys, we need to stop fighting. We're killing each other. So let's come to an agreement. And essentially, as far as I can tell, the agreement was the 14th Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
And the 14th Amendment was, we're going to release the slaves, but we're not going to give them all the rights of a full state citizen.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to give them the rights of what's called a federal citizen. And they're just going to be essentially volunteer employees or officers of this new corporation.
This is essentially now voluntary slavery, but it's almost like a trickery voluntary slavery because it's unbeknownst to them, but it's still voluntary because you can get yourself out of it versus involuntary servitude.
Yeah, so involuntary servitude was made illegal during that same time period. Yep. So the whole system changed from an involuntary servitude system to a voluntary servitude system through the 14th Amendment. Mm. So the South, which is they're the ones who wanted to keep, as far as history tells us, right. The South wanted to keep slavery. So at that point in time, now it's like, okay, they're not going to become full Americans. They're just not going to be full indentured servitude. Right. It made it a softer, more acceptable situation for the people who didn't want it to end. And then the people who did want it to end, it became a situation where, well, you're getting what you wanted. Technically speaking, slavery is ending, right?
And I would imagine a lot of this, if we're applying the current tactics that are used by the government, by the media, et cetera, I would imagine back then, this all sounded great and like the moral thing to do because it's like, hey, we're ending slavery. But the reality is, again, it was just a trick in that, yes, they were ending involuntary servitude, at least in the context of the United States, but they were making us all, unbeknownst to us, like everyone that was born thereafter, voluntary slaves by making this federal citizenship system, essentially.
Yeah, this is an interesting subject because let's say, for example, you alleged that I physically harmed you. Now, what's going to happen is that there's two types of physical harm. There's let's say, for example, if you killed me and someone was suing on behalf of me for being killed, there's manslaughter, which means you didn't intend to do it, which would give you several years in prison. And you can it's not the end of the world really. And then there's premeditated intent, which would be murder, which you're going to go away for a long time. Now, the thing is that this third party, the DOJ or a prosecuting attorney from the United States, would have to prove your intent by proving a series of things, such as maybe a text message you sent, something that you owned, you were here, and they would need to build out proving your intent through evidence collection and evidence production and depositions. And obviously the easiest thing to do is just to get you to admit it. That transforms months and months and months and months of work and evidence collection into done deal, boom, 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 put them on the stand, end of story. That's why they push the idea of giving you deals, and you hear all the stuff about deals and all this stuff, because otherwise the amount of effort and work that people think we live in a lawless society. We live in a lawless society because everyone cuts a deal and everyone just rats on themselves. If everyone just shut their mouth, a tremendous amount of work, like for example, even the John Wayne Gacy case, mass murderer, evidence out the wazoo, they prepared for like a year for that trial. Mm-hmm. So the thing is, you have to realize that we do have the same system. It's not really the system, right? So the thing is that you sit here and talk about intent. I don't know. And the thing is that if you alleged that they had the intent to do these things, you're the one who's going to have to work for 8 months to build out the evidence.
That's totally fair.
And the thing is that we live in a world where no one knows any of this.
Right.
And people get scared and they do these things. And it's all an intimidation based laziness, essentially. Right. So the thing is that what their intent was, if we were to go on a more positive end or a more optimistic end, was we're at war, everything's going to shit. What do we do in an effort to try to placate everybody well enough to just move on with our lives? And that ended up being the 14th Amendment, and no one cared, and everyone was just excited that it was all over, and the nightmare was just, I mean, who knows? And then they just it went under the radar because it's like, well, what do you want to do? You want to fight about this again? We're gonna be in a civil war forever if we keep doing that.
Right.
Who knows? And then you also got to think too, like, there's no internet, there's no nothing, there's buggies and horses, and there's nothing. So like, how is a newspaper and the printing press? And I think the printing press wasn't even terribly new. It was kind of somewhat new. I could be wrong on that.
It wasn't used in mass, let's say.
Yeah, but it's just like craziness.
Right.
Like, how would anyone find out? It's all small towns and there's homesteads, and that's where the whole idea of rural-free delivery came from, which we still use today.
Wow.
So it's just like, I have no idea. And the intention in a world like this, the intention to help or the intention to harm is very powerful in a world like this.
Totally.
Yeah. You're here, you're doing your thing, you're in your early 30s and you're affecting the whole world with what you're doing. Back then, that wasn't really an option because one town would have an intention or an idea and the next town over. You're not able to just blast out something and be the first seed in the ground necessarily. With a lot of things too. I think it was like the promulgating seeds and then where people were at everywhere was so independent that's why we had common law back then.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Because the thing is that you can't, there was no indoctrination network. It didn't exist.
Right. Everything was fundamentally decentralized.
A school was basically a bunch of moms that were teaching their kids probably things like sewing or hunting or cleaning weapons or putting seeds in the ground or growing or, you know, and the fathers were probably teaching repairing your shoes, repairing wooden car wheel. It was probably just hang out with my parents and just learn whatever they're doing while they're doing it and say, you know, Mom, what the hell are you doing there? What is this? What is that? What is this? Well,
sounds like a lot of the homeschooling and unschooling pods that I know of now, actually.
See what I mean?
Kind of how we did with our kids, too.
Now, I'm assuming all this.
Right.
Based off of a lot of circumstantial information.
Probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the thing is that, you know, it's a fully decentralized, essentially, it's almost like, you think back to that time period and you think like what people believe Bitcoin is almost, but a whole society based off of this completely autonomous, completely
self-governing in local areas.
Yeah, like this little tiny, you got like 40
Yeah.
people and a saloon, and it's like you're gonna have to get in there.
Right.
It's not gonna be like just issue some information and boom, everyone believes it. Plus they can't see any of
Right.
it. All they see is Jim and Bob and Joe, and then you have common law, which is being tried by your what do you call it? Your equals, right? Back then, you know, when we actually had a common law society, your equals were Joe and Bob and the guy at the saloon that you've been seeing for 20 years, who have watched your freaking kids grow up.
Right.
So the thing is that it's like, oh no, I know everything about this guy's background. So it's like, yeah, they're kind of biased, but they know who you are.
Totally.
That's what common law really is, because then it's like, bro, you really messed up. You know what I mean?
It's people holding them, like the community holding itself accountable, essentially. Yeah. And this is what's so incredible. And I want to get to this eventually. We have so many things to cover, so I want to.
No, it's fine. I'll you know,
bridging the gap between the voluntarist anarcho-capitalist community and the common law sort of status correction space. And it's understanding that the non-aggression principle is literally common law. It's just don't initiate an act of aggression against someone or their property. That's literally what common law is, because those are the only common law crimes, are initiating an act of aggression against someone or their property. So it's like they marry together so well, And that's what I think, I've talked about this a little bit. A lot of people that are self-professed voluntarists and anarcho capitalists don't really take into consideration, and that's what we're getting at here, is that will I say that agents of the state don't infringe or impose upon us at times wrongfully? No, I won't say that. They do sometimes, but overwhelmingly, in the overwhelming majority of cases, agents of the state will only impose or infringe upon us based on our own consent, whether in that actual instance itself or consent based on the contractual obligations we have entered ourselves into with the state itself, right? Would you agree with that?
I would agree, and I would say that a lot of it just stems from laziness, because the amount of effort it will take to prosecute you, because we don't actually live in a lawless society. We still live very much in a society where everything has to be proven and you're innocent until proven guilty, and they just don't want to deal with the amount of tremendous, wild, extremely expensive. You need extreme professionals. You need detectives. You need trial attorneys. It's just insane the amount of work that goes into actually prosecuting someone for almost anything, especially a criminal situation. So you're saving them, millions and millions of dollars in expenses by just simply ratting on yourself and waiving your Fifth Amendment, and that's why they give you a deal, right? But the thing is that there's so many real criminals that have done nothing more than just kept their mouth shut,
right?
Which is part of the mafia code.
Yeah,
big part of the mafia code, right?
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, the mafia was running all of New York City for decades, and it's like, okay, well, you got La Cosa Nostra, and you have what's rule number one is you keep your fucking mouth shut. That makes it very difficult on the prosecutors, right? So the thing is that, but they got too cocky and started doing everything in public. So then they started to be able to actually build cases, and then you have RICO, which came around that time period specifically to combat all of that. So you have a lot of things. Right?
Let's go back though to the 14th Amendment and the Organic Act, because those two hand in hand created U.S. citizenship, right?
So at that time it was called. So there was a series of court cases right after the 14th Amendment at the Supreme Court called the slaughterhouse cases.
Right.
The slaughterhouse cases were massive in that they interpreted what was meant by the 14th Amendment. And how these slaughterhouse cases at the Supreme Court interpreted the 14th Amendment was that there was actually two types of citizenship classes. There was the federal citizen, and there was the state citizen. The state citizen was the people who were living in the United States of America prior to the 14th Amendment, and they were the actual real Americans.
And like the European, Europe is going in this direction, but let's say Europe 20 years back, the United States of America was a bunch of independent nations who were together basically for the prosperity of the whole on that land, right? Like that was the whole intention. But they were independent nations.
It was basically a Europe.
Right.
It was the same exact idea.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this is the whole idea of globalism.
Mm-hmm.
This is the globalist. This is we are looking at the source code of the globalist agenda.
Yeah, we could say that this was maybe one of the initial acts that set the domino effect of globalism was back in freaking in the 1860s and 70s.
So the idea of the European Union was their source code for globalizing Europe.
Right.
The globalization of America was much, much easier. And it's probably why America was chosen as the main military arm for the globalist agenda, because it was already called United States of America.
Yeah.
Some brilliant mind that was totally psychotic decided that it's already done for us. We don't need to create a European Union and then get everyone into that and then do that. It's already there. The substructure is already there.
Right.
It's called the United States of America, and we're just going to create an incorporated system called United States. So no one will ever know the difference.
Right. Exactly. I think you're 100% onto something there. So we look at the slaughterhouse cases, and what exactly did they do again?
So they decided, and you can look up all of this online, obviously, anybody who would like to look this up. They decided that there's two different classes of citizen. There's the federal citizen and there's the state citizen. Now, over the years, those terms changed, and the federal citizen became the United States citizen or U.S. citizen, and the state citizen became national, the word national. and it's not a capitalized word, it's lowercase n. There are other areas where they say national. There's other areas where they say U.S. national. There's other areas where they say a non-citizen national. The word national and the word non-citizen national basically mean the same. And then the term U.S. national is slightly different. It's somebody who does not live in the United States, but they have pledged allegiance to the United States.
Mhm.
That's a U.S. national, right? The term national comes from Title 8, Section 1101, subsection A21. And it basically is just someone who pledges allegiance to a state.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to think a national doesn't necessarily need to be somebody who has pledged allegiance to the United States. It could be somebody who's pledged allegiance to Hungary or something like that. They would be a national in relationship to the United States, but they aren't a U.S. national until they have pledged allegiance specifically to the United States, which is a fascinating subject. I talk about it a lot in a lot of my shows because if you look at the passport system, in order to be eligible for a U.S. passport, all you have to do is just pledge allegiance to the United States. You could be in South Africa, and you can pledge allegiance to the United States, and you can actually get a passport, and that's as per 22 United States Code Section 212, as well as 22 CFR Section 51.2, which states that passports are only issued to U.S. nationals. Actually, so it's a very interesting rabbit hole that I like to get into a lot. But basically, I don't think that's how it worked then. I don't know really how it worked back then. Right. But fast forwarding, if you look at really old passport application forms, they actually had right on there U.S. citizen and state citizen, and it was little boxes you could check.
Wow.
Which is mind-blowing.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because the thing is that a U.S. national would be a state citizen.
Mm-hmm.
A U.S. citizen is somebody who is essentially a volunteer employee or officer of the District of Columbia, essentially, right?
Because this is where the Organic Act comes in.
So the Organic Act kind of birthed the District of Columbia.
Right? Exactly.
So it was all born during that time. And for all we know, because if you want to allege intent, you got a long road ahead of you. For all we know, it was all because they just wanted to figure out a solution that would stop the people who didn't want slavery to end from being at war with the people who did. And they were just trying to find some common ground as somewhere in the middle to try to end this nightmare. And this was the solution they came up with. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess my conspiracy, like what are they planning, orchestrating mind always goes off. And you are right, though. You're absolutely right, because we weren't there. We can't know for sure. But we know over the years it was changed slowly into what it is now. We know what we have now. Right.
That's you can see the intent. I could prove the intent.
But I think back to like
now.
the anti-federalists, though, right? Like they were sounding the alarm about setting up a federal government system way back then.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like, I just look at that and how they were kind of squashed, and I'm like, this seems like just a continuation of that from, like centuries ago. But
redefining the term person, that to me, that seems pretty nefarious.
Right. Absolutely.
I'll tell you that for sure.
Especially because the overwhelming majority of people have no clue. Have zero clue.
That's one where you could put together enough evidence to prove some sort of intent. You could go through discovery. You'd be asking a lot of questions. If you could like grab all the people who were involved in that and put them in a room, it's like, why are you doing this? How does this even marry up to the Organic Act? Like this doesn't even seem necessary.
Right.
To
redefine it.
Marries
perfectly.
Yeah.
It marries perfectly.
Well, yeah, but it's like the Organic Act you can get away with, it's like, public school system, blah, blah, blah. Like, oh yeah.
Right.
But then you plug that into the redefining of the word person. You're like, wait a second. That seems a little bit.
The Organic Act by itself could seem like, okay, well-intentioned. But then when you put the 14th Amendment and redefining the term person and U.S. citizenship in there, that's where it's like, whoa, because essentially how those two work together is now we have a corporate system overlaid on top of the land that is the United States of America that technically only applies to those who are within a, I think, 10-mile radius of the District of Columbia, but I don't know exactly what it is. They just say it's
We don't know.
the United States is in the United States government is in the district, is a federal corporation in the District of Columbia. But what it has made us, and when I say us, before we come into this awareness, by virtue of our all caps name that was initially set forth by the birth certificate and then the Social Security card, right, is that we are now employees and we have our own corporation without us even realizing it, and they're sub-corporations of the United States government that is a corporation in the District of Columbia.
Yeah, so just real quick for the people watching, because I know this is somewhat new, you haven't blasted this out too much. So 28 USC 3002 subsection 15 definition A, it says United States means, and then below that it says a federal corporation, and the word federal is capitalized, which is pretty fascinating. I went on the whole.
What is the significance of that?
As far as I can tell, and it's they're really good at defining everything very clearly. Actually, everything is pretty open. The one thing that I've ever found that is just so hidden and so secret and so convoluted on purpose is that there's actually, they use the word state in lowercase, they use the word state in uppercase, and they use the word federal in uppercase. And as far as I can tell, it's all circumstantial because they actually don't define it anywhere. It's actually one area that is completely smokescreened out. A capital usage of the term state is referring to a corporation located in the District of Columbia, whereas a lowercase non-capital usage of the word state means the original legal definition from Black's Law, which is just a body politic or nation.
Right.
It could be any body politic or nation. And it's mind-blowing because when you click on the lowercase definition, the lowercase state, when it's used in lowercase, it goes to the uppercase definition.
Wow.
And the uppercase definition of federal is not defined anywhere, as far as I've ever seen. But that's just from digging around and looking at 80 million things and circumstantial. If I was presented all my evidence in the way I think to a jury, I think I could probably get it worked out. But in terms of like really, really nailing all of that down with the specific definitions like I do with everything else, it's the one area that's just, it's very vague.
Have you gone down the rabbit hole of when our name is spelled in all lowercase, that just means a man. When it's spelled in with one letter uppercase and then lowercase, it's a man with obligations or duties, right? And then when it's all uppercase, it's referring to the legal fiction or the corporation that was established in our name.
Yeah, you have things like the Latin term, it's like diminius, whatever, deprecates, something, blah, blah, blah. I've seen some information that points to some of that information, but I just try to put everything in the I need, we'll see. It's interesting, bin.
Yeah.
Until I can like completely.
You're doing what's applicable right now.
Yeah.
Like what can give me meaning and use in this life? Utility.
Well, I want things I can really, really fully tie down.
Right.
Where if I go into a court or I do any litigation, there's no chance. It's a done deal before I even walk in there. And there are things that I have that are theories that aren't tied down, and oftentimes I just move forward, and then months later I find what I need, and I grab that piece and I tie it down.
Yeah, that kind of came into effect when you now are talking about location, and because this is relatively new, right?
I've broken down. New. So I was actually going to go on Crow 777, and right before that. During this whole time period. So for people who aren't familiar, Crow 777 is a very large radio audio broadcast.
They cover a lot of dope esoteric stuff.
It's like massive. It's awesome. it's literally the underground Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
And what happened is that my own people were banging on their doors for like 9 months, and the guy who runs it, Crow, he is an old military guy. Mm-hmm. And he has a lot of homeschools play his show, like tons. It's like a huge section of his demographic. And the cursing was just totally unacceptable to Crow, right? So for 9 months, all my people, all my fans were just banging down his doors. And he said, no, it's not appropriate. Then finally it got so bad with them, and they just had their windows were being broken in, their doors were being broken in, and they decided to do like a pre-call with Crow, and Crow kind of like sternly told me, these are adults. We're adults. We're going to go on the show as adults. There's going to be no cursing. I said, I have this other URL. Don't be a slave. I said, but normally if we're going to do that, I just want to let them know that it's going to go to a different website, which does have strong language. And just, I assure you, it's all a joke, but it may not seem so at first. I promise, just hang around for a minute and you'll see that it's not actually, it's all just kind of fake and fun. And it's all just a big joke. And during that time period, he told me during the pre-call, he's like, status correction, and we've been doing this stuff for 20 years, and we have a guy we've been working with, and he goes on and on. And I said, how would you define status correction? And he just flat-footed right there. Right. And I flat-footed too, because that's when I asked him, I was like, wait a second, what does this even mean?
Because you'd obviously heard
Everyone's
it before.
Heard of it.
Was it just in that moment for some reason you thought like, wow, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
And you just said
how would you even define it? Yeah. Because I didn't know. I realized I didn't really know. Everyone does it differently, right?
Like it's a loose from our, without getting into the legalese of it, and I know you have nailed it down, and how you've nailed it down is great. It's like, okay, status correction in my mind means you are removing yourself from the jurisdiction of the U.S. government into a jurisdiction that enables you to live more freely as a man.
Well, that's what I used to think, and then it got more fluid, and now I think of it more like playing pieces on the Monopoly board, and you can move them around at will, however you want, whenever you want.
Can you share that now?
It's more, yeah, sure. So you have, for my opinion, status correction, and during this time period is when I developed this new way of explaining it, and now I explain it in this new way, which it may go through more evolutions as we go forward, obviously, right? But I break it down into two sections: identity and location. So the word person means an individual, an estate, a partnership, a company, a corporation, etc. And so the way Title 8 defines the word person, which is all about nationality, the definition from Title 8 is an individual or an organization, which is a little more simplified. The Internal Revenue Code, which is Title 26, defines person with more detail, including the actual names of all the various options of entities. So that's the definition that yourself and I keep using is actually the definition from Title 26, which is just, I like it more. It's more verbose. It's more specific, right?
Yep.
So identity is every single individual, estate, partnership, company, corporation, association that you essentially control. So it's every piece on the board that you control, right? But you don't know that there was a corporation that was opened in your name in all capital letters that they control, but you can just as easily control it as they are. So once you control it, it thus becomes your playing piece. That's the way I talk about it, right? So you have yourself, you have the public corporation / what we call ens legis, which is my favorite term to describe that all caps corporation, right? Ens legis is very clear. It's a creature of the law, an artificial being as contrasted with a natural person, applied to corporations considered as deriving their existence entirely from the law. I feel like that's a very good description of what this thing is, right? So you have that, and then you have any other trusts, corporations, estates, partnerships, associations that you may have opened, such as your Starbucks or your whatever, your Ford, the list goes on and on and on. So all of those are all your playing pieces, your scruffy dog, your iron, your car, your Monopoly pieces, right? And then on the other side is when I found the definition of the term naturalization, that's when everything kind of blew wide open for me, right? The term naturalization comes from Title 8, Section 1101, subsection A23, the conferring of nationality of a state upon a person after birth by any means whatsoever. So it has
break
nothing to
down
do.
what that means in layman's terms, though, because that is so significant. That is so significant.
So naturalization is very, very simple, and it's one of those things. Like I said at our speech when we did the in-person speech the other night, it's something that it's the one aspect of all of this that's so mind-blowing that it's very difficult to emotionally assimilate in a small period of time. I would say the average time it takes to emotionally assimilate the definition of naturalization is probably 30 to 60 days. It was for me. It was like 60 days for me. I'm talking all day walking around in a daze for 60 days for me to fully emotionally accept the definition, right? It literally means wherever you say any of these estates, individuals, partnerships, associations, estates, companies, or corporations, wherever you say they are located, they are now located there. That simple. Literally, It's that simple, right? So if you say that your Starbucks is located in Zimbabwe, legally, instantaneously, your Starbucks is now located in Zimbabwe.
Right. By any means. You could literally just express it and record it on your phone, or you could do all this paperwork to submit it to the government to put them on notice. Or you could, as you said the other day, pee in the snow and record that.
You could do it all, right? Now, you can also confer nationality of a state upon another person.
Mm-hmm.
So your businesses or you or your ends
Which is scary, because I feel like that's where it could get a little bit dicey, because like, wouldn't you have to put that man or woman on notice that you're doing that in order for it to be...
No one knows.
Yeah, I hate that so
No one knows the definition.
I mean, I guess...
Recently, that thing with Biden where he like wiped away 180,000 people's illegal immigrant status or whatever. I think this was probably like 8 months ago.
That's what he did.
That's what he did.
Yeah.
So I can do the same thing. You can do the same thing.
Yeah, that is insane.
If you were able to get the names of 180,000 people who have not yet conferred the nationality of a state upon themselves after birth by any means whatsoever, you can write, I confer the nationality of United States upon the following persons, and then you list 180,000 names after birth by any means whatsoever, and you've just, anyone can make an illegal immigrant legal, because an illegal immigrant by definition is somebody who has not conferred the nationality of a state upon themselves or their families or whoever. Actually, now that I think about it, right here on live on this show, it's actually even better definition would be someone who has not conferred or had conferred upon them the nationality of a state after birth by any means whatsoever, because you don't have to confer it on yourself.
Right.
Someone has to confer it on
that's
you.
And that makes total sense, because that's what happened with the birth certificate. That literally was the nationality being conferred upon you. Because now I'm trying to break this down in terms of its like practical application to those of us who live in the United States of America. And I want to be careful with my word choice. Those of us who live on this land that is colloquially known as America, right? So how it applies to us is that with the birth certificate, we were basically pushed into this federalized citizenship system that is a corporate system.
We were coerced, I'd say it would be even better.
Coerced, yeah. And this is where it gets interesting based on like contractual obligations. Because I'm like, is that a valid contract? Was there an intent to contract? Things like this. And I think the answer to that is no. Is just like everyone accepts that this is how it is, so we just continue on with it. But
well, if you assume it's true and you like it, we've been programmed to actually enjoy it.
Right.
To the point where if you go to Indiana, where I'm from in the Midwest, and you tell someone they're not a U.S. citizen, they're liable to beat your ass.
It's so true. So true. And especially in right-leaning locations too, which is interesting because those tend to be more freedom-oriented, but they are unknowingly keeping themselves enslaved.
You couldn't unnaturalize them if you tried.
Right.
And the thing is you can unnaturalize them by simply conferring the nationality of a state upon them as a person after birth by any means whatsoever.
Right.
If you're enjoying this episode, please consider sharing it with at least one friend or family member who you think could benefit from hearing it. You help us grow and reach more people by sharing it with those around you. Also, be sure to head to the show notes to check out our membership offerings, membership marketplace, and more. We all know that Big Ag is poisoning our food supply, and Big Pharma's so-called medicine is straight up poison. What most people aren't aware of, though, is that most supplements are also filled with artificial sweeteners, dyes, GMOs, glyphosate, and a host of other toxic ingredients, even many of the more natural supplements. My good buddy James Benefico dedicated his life to crafting the world's cleanest, most nutritious organic supplements after a pre-workout energy drink caused heart palpitations so severe that he almost landed up in the ER. Organic Muscle was born, revolutionizing sports nutrition by using exclusively non-GMO ingredients from USDA organic farms. Since then, tens of thousands of people, including myself, have leveled up their fitness and their health with Organic Muscle's award-winning natural pre-workout. There's no jitters, no heart palpitations, no itchy skin, just nourishing organic food and herb-based ingredients for clean, sustained energy, strength, endurance, and recovery. Numerous studies have shown that Tonka Ali is the most effective herb in the world for naturally boosting testosterone levels. And we know that testosterone levels are depleting all over the world because of what's put in the food supply, what we're exposed to, Organic Muscle has the world's first fully organic Tomcat Ali supplement. I only support and promote things that I actually use, and I can say I legitimately use Organic Muscle products. Use code FORWARD15 at checkout for 15% off at organicmuscle.com.
We were talking about how the United States is located in the District of Columbia. Now, just for all the listeners, that comes from Uniform Commercial Code 9-307, and then it's subsection H, and it says literally verbatim, it says the United States is located in the District of Columbia. We don't know where or how large or what shape it is, which is actually very interesting because someone can tell you you're in the U.S. and you would say, well, if you want to assume such a thing, you would need to prove it. And I don't think anyone can actually prove the actual coordinate location and size of the United States, but it's somewhere in the District of Columbia, some size, some shape. We don't know if it's on the
It could be the
northeast,
entirety
the
of
southeast.
the District
We have no
of Columbia.
idea.
Yeah,
It could be literally a piece of paper in a filing cabinet. We have no idea the actual size and scope. And the only way you can actually physically move there is by naturalizing, by saying that you live there.
Wow. You know, I've always been under the assumption that, as I've been learning this stuff at least, that the United States, being that it's in the District of Columbia, meant that just the District of Columbia was the United States.
I kind of thought that too. And then over the years, that's an assumption.
Yeah, it is. It's totally an assumption because it says it's in the District of Columbia. But
it's almost like a subsector.
Mm-hmm.
It's like saying there's a Starbucks that's in the District of Columbia. It's not the District of Columbia.
Right.
You see?
Yeah, it's not the United States it's in the District of Columbia.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So what this means in layman's terms is that when we refer to the United States, it depends on what you mean by that. And this is where words really matter because most of the time people, like especially right-leaning people, when it comes to the ideals, the patriotism, conflate the U.S. government, which is a corporate entity that is located in the District of Columbia, with the land that is the United States of America. And there's a lot of just messiness in terms of really there's a huge distinction between the two, but there's a lot of messiness when we wrap all that up together with a lot of patriotic ideals and sentiments of freedom and things like this. And that's where it can become really confusing. But it's really, really, really important to nail this down, that the United States we're referring to here is talking about just the land that is the District of Columbia, but we have been by, these contractual
naturalization.
Right, exactly. We have been naturalized into the District of Columbia, and then therefore we are subject to the jurisdiction which goes along with the codes, acts, and statutes of the federal government.
Because it's even more fascinating because it's actually not, you're not naturalizing as a natural person. You're naturalizing the ens legis,
Right.
and then you are failing to separate your identity from the ens legis.
Exactly.
So as a highly spiritual person myself, I consider that myself is the way that I define person in a lot of my private documents that I use when I redefine all of the words and stuff like that, and I do a lot of things. The way that I define the term person and redefine the term person is the seat of creativity. So the seat of creativity is you as a spiritual entity is different than your physical body. So it's the same idea as you as a spiritual entity, or how I define the seat of creativity identifies with your physical body, and you say, I am the physical body. I feel like law and this system is the exact same thing as if somebody was walking around, such as you see with Big Pharma, where they're going around and they're getting people to identify with a physical body that is not the same entity as themselves.
And then they become afraid because of that, because dude, you are speaking my language 100%.
Yeah.
Because
I think it's an exact duplicate.
It is. It really is an exact duplicate. And this is one of many reasons why this is such a spiritual process to come to understand this stuff, especially because when you do this, you are basically removing yourself from the jurisdiction of those that would have control over you otherwise, right? And that requires a lot of self-ownership, which in my opinion, in order to do it correctly, requires a lot of inner work and coming to terms with No one out there has come to save you. And likewise, no one is going to govern your own affairs. You really have to self-govern, which means you have to get right with yourself and not project your own shit onto others, and really manage all of your own affairs, and stop looking to government as this daddy that's going to protect you, or this mommy that's going to give you handouts and nourishment. You have to take 100% ownership of yourself in this process, and that itself is a spiritual process.
Yeah, and the definitions that you're going to come across, and the way that things are defined, and the way that things have been defined over the years, and what you'll learn through learning all this, even though it is very shocking to see that almost nothing means what you thought it meant. The definitions that you will be presented with are incredible, mind-blowing. They're way more applicable than the ones that you've been taught your whole life. They're way more usable than the ones you've been taught your entire life, and it will change the structure of your relationship with every aspect of your entire world, including your sex life, your married life, your children. You will be blown away how you will learn the judicial system and breakdown of how all of that works, and then how applicable that is, even in the being the judge, jury, and executioner of the various social and professional activities that you have even in your own life, and how you relate those things. And it's an amazing, it's basically like the legal version of an out-of-body experience, essentially. Because if the United States or the ens legis was the body, you are externalizing or exteriorizing from that body and realizing that that is a corporate body. They actually use the term corporate body.
Right.
So I
For
literally
the
think of
name.
it.
That's what the
I
ens legis
literally
is to
think of
remind
it
people.
in the exact same.
Right.
You are internalizing and losing yourself inside of a corporate body that they didn't force you into, they coerced you into.
Right.
But the problem is that it's been going on for so long that the system itself is doing that now, but no one in the system even realizes that they're doing that. It's become completely autopiloted. There is no one at the wheel.
Right.
I truly believe that there's no one at the wheel.
I tend to, and we've already talked about this before, I still, can I prove this? Absolutely not. I tend to think at the tippy top there are people in the know, but I could be wrong.
tippy, yes.
Yeah, and I'm talking about like at the banking system level. Like
I've talked to some bigwigs there, and I'm very, very good at feeling people out and body language, and I'm trained like off the wazoo, and I just don't think that they really totally know what's going on.
And that might be true. That honestly might be true. But okay, but regardless, there's got to be.
But there's like a lot of people, and they're all over the place,
Right.
and who does and who doesn't. Like I don't know. I would assume you don't know. So
yeah,
if you don't know these people and you can't prove intent, and
Exactly.
you don't know.
But I'm just looking again at like the way everything is going, and with that, like with this control centralization structure that is in place that wishes to dominate us and exploit us and enslave us, for lack of a better term. There tends to be a lot of like, oh, so what do we do about it? Like, we can't do anything. And I don't share those sentiments, despite also understanding that, yes, there is that thing, that mechanism, and maybe people at the tippy top in place trying to do that to all of humanity in some way, all the centralization and exploiting us. Despite that, there are exit strategies for us where they will mostly leave us the fuck alone if we just take ownership of ourselves and express like, I'm not doing this anymore.
Well, here's an interesting sentiment that I literally just realized right now talking to you. I believe that the entire system, the linchpin that holds this entire, what I would consider unknowing system together, is that the average human being is evil in some way, and they need to be restrained. And the entire system is basically built in a way where the ultimate assumption inside the system that holds the system in place from everyone grabbing it and ripping it apart from every direction is, oh yes, if there wasn't this system, because of the bad intent of the average human being, we have to have these defenses in place to keep the demons at bay. Now we can go even farther and say, well, wait a second, we're sitting here talking about the intent of banking executives. Are we not feeding a very exact idea of which the system itself is bred from?
That's a very good point.
So the thing is that it's our assumption of intent itself, which is nearly impossible to prove. It's the most difficult thing in the world to prove, and it's the basis of our entire legal system, both statutory and common law. Did they have the intent to do it? Did they have the intent not to do it? What if you put something in your pocket and you didn't realize you were stealing and you walk out? Massive difference between that and premeditated, I'm taking this, F you, put it in your pocket. In law, even in the statutory world, it's still the same, common law or statutory.
Well,
so the thing is that by us assuming the intention of the people who are so-called running this system is to feed the very assumption that keeps the system needing to be there in the first place.
That's a really good point. And the stance that and you're so spot on in that. The stance that I take is irrespective of whether what their intentions are or not, the system is as it is, and we by our own volition can get out of it. We can pull ourselves out of it regardless of what it is, whether they have bad intent or good intent, whether they, have that same fundamental assumption that most people have about human beings being evil. So we need this system in place to control people, because if not, they'll, exploit and kill all of each other. And if not for us, right? So in either way, in either case, we can exit the system. We can exit the matrix, and this is the way to do it. And again, being that most of my audience are voluntarist, anarcho capitalist, libertarian leaning, this is the bridge to get to that point where we are engaging in a society that is based on voluntary interaction. It is revoking the various contractual arrangements we have found ourselves in with the government itself, and removing ourselves from that jurisdiction so that we can come back to what is as close to a self-governing system as there was.
Yeah, naturalization can work for you as the natural person, and it can also work for all of your corporations, estates, partnerships, associations, companies. So the thing is that by, and the other thing that gets kind of crazy with this is I've never seen anything that says that you can only naturalize to one location at a time. You could actually naturalize into a whole bunch. You could naturalize into every nation on earth all at the same time. And there's really nothing stopping you from doing that. You can be everywhere or nowhere or over here or over in these three places, which is also very wild and very interesting and very confusing. Because the thing is that the only evidence you would need to provide a court in terms of anything is just the fact that you have conferred the nationality of a state upon a person after birth by any means whatsoever. So it's interesting because you wouldn't even need to prove that naturalization had taken place previously. You could actually live right in the response to, let's say, a lawsuit. You could just simply confer nationality of a state upon a person after birth. But you don't even need to prove it.
Right.
It's so crazy. You don't even need to prove that it occurred. You can do it live.
Yeah.
You did it before, but unless time is some huge aspect to whatever it is that you're trying to defend or fight against. But is there any
stipulations of that?
I don't think there is.
Yeah.
No, it's by any means whatsoever.
Yeah.
So there's nothing you can just, like someone says something and you say, oh no, I've been naturalized for a long time. And now they put you on your back foot. Oh, well, prove it. You were naturalized. I don't need to prove anything. I'll renaturalize right now, right in front of you.
Wow.
I confer the nationality of the nation of the Amnesty Coalition upon myself as a natural person, as well as my ens legis, as well as the 3 or 4 trusts that I have that I operate off of, which I could name or not name after birth by any means whatsoever.
So, because you just said Amnesty Coalition, so have you naturalized into Amnesty Coalition, which is a nation that you have formed, as well as another state?
So I'm essentially I am naturalized into my own nation, which is the nation of the Amnesty Coalition.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also an ambassador of the micronation called Slowjamistan,
mm-hmm.
and I have
Slowjamistan.
Okay, which is really really fun. Everyone should check that out. It's this super super fun nation where there's this guy named Randy Williams, ironically, last name. And he runs a micronation. It's pretty close to LA. It's 3 hours east of LA. It's right by the Salton Sea. And it's just straight up goofiness. They have like a police car that they drive around all over California. And it looks just like a real police car. It's got blue and red lights and everything. And it says Republic of Slowjamistan. And it says dial 911 for strippers, jazzercise, and something else. Dude. And they have their own fire truck. And on the side of the fire truck, it says where to hose at. And it's HOSE. It's brilliant. And the main guy, he dresses up like a sultan, and he's called the Sultan of Slowjamistan. They have their own currency. They have their own coins. They have their own passport. I have
How many people are a member
passport.
of this nation?
It was like 16,000 citizens very recently, but it's growing at such a breakneck speed, right?
So with the passport thing real quick, because I know based on the existing codes and regulations that are, the U.S. codes and codes of federal regulations, that technically what they're doing in Soljamistan is correct. They are able to, as a nation, have their own passport. Now
the one thing that's a little
getting other people
interesting
to recognize it, though.
The one thing that's interesting about this whole subject, and I went on a deep dive on this because I really wanted to know, do you need land in order to have your own nation? And I believe Randy Williams of Soljamistan believes the answer to that question would be yes, or he did at one point in time. I have more than circumstantial evidence. I essentially have, I could show you literally if you wanted to look up the, and I know a lot of people, especially in the conspiracy theory world, has a lot of bad things to say about what I'm already to say. I don't know. I don't care. I use this example just as an example to illustrate that you don't need land in order to have a nation. You have the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. Now they issue their own passports. They issue their own driver's licenses. They issue their own license plates. They have no land. They have no roads.
That's interesting.
Proof. Boom, right there. I knew it. It was a theory I had for a long time. And then I found the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. And regardless of their intentions and regardless of whatever goofiness they may be involved in, it's evidence. It is irrefutable evidence that you do not need land to have your own nation. Well,
another example would be like the United Nations, and then another example possibly could be NATO as well.
Yep.
Right?
I'm assuming there probably are other ones if I were to look into those in more detail and stuff. The United Nations thing is a little bit complicated because the very center of Manhattan is actually considered a private city, essentially, that no one knows about. That's basically owned by the United Nations.
Wow.
Like the United Nations property that they have, their main headquarters, and I believe it's Manhattan, is considered like its own country. If it makes sense. So I think the UN actually does have a little parcel of land in Manhattan.
Okay.
But regardless of all that, you do not need land in order to have your own nation. It's not a requirement at all. But Soljamistan made it a point to procure I think probably $5,000 piece of land in the middle of absolute nowhere. It's literally just a dirt pile in the middle of absolutely
nowhere. Did they file
nowhere.
a land patent or anything like that?
No idea.
Okay.
So the Soljamistan is interesting because they don't really talk about or teach anything of how they're doing it or why they're doing it. It's just literally just a giant dog and pony show. The whole thing is just absolutely like bone bustingly hilarious. It's basically like a gigantic comedy show.
Yeah.
He's all over the country. He's all over the world. He's on massive news. I don't even know how he gets on the main. We're talking like Channel 5 news and stuff.
Yeah.
He's on these. And they love it.
Yeah.
They love it. Like it's like mainstream as you can possibly get. And they're like loving it. They're not degrading him. He's on mainstream news in Germany. He's all over the place. Randy Williams. He's absolutely brilliant. He drives around all over the streets with his police cars and his fire trucks, and he's got his Sultan outfit, and then he has a border patrol agent, and he's dressed up in body armor, and he has squirt guns, literally, in his body armor. I mean, we're talking like, this is like, you think I'm a troll?
This is trolling to like the 100th level.
It's literally trolling to a level where no one knows if he's really trolling or not. That's how high the troll is. Literally, it's brilliant. So I'm an ambassador of Soljamistan. I have pledged limited allegiance to the United States. Very, very limited allegiance. People don't realize that if you want to get a U.S. passport, you can do, and you are not a citizen. You are eligible to get a passport if you pledge allegiance. Now, allegiance can be absolute or it can be temporary and qualified. And I have issued a temporary qualified statement of allegiance, and that is how I have a U.S. passport, but I do not live in the United States.
Yeah. That's great, because that's the questions that come up when it comes to anything like this is like, okay, well, how do I travel? And that's the answer is you can still engage in these various contracts in a way that best suits you for what you're wanting to do as a natural person, really, again, a man or a woman, and still remain free of the jurisdiction of the U.S. government. You can still, you can technically, I know you have done the process to where you don't use a driver's license anymore, but you can still technically have a driver's license if you engage in that contract in the correct way.
So I converted the contract because I wasn't comfortable getting rid of the driver's license for a long time.
Okay.
I changed the contract dramatically, and I did a whole bunch of adjustments. I adjusted my address to be CO, care of. Care of is really cool because care of means I don't live here. I just receive mail here. Very tricky. It took them a while to catch up with us on that one, but now a lot of times they're saying they can't do the CO and stuff like that. And then the way that I signed the signature area and the driver's license is I added without prejudice above my signature, which means that it's essentially without prejudice is the same as saying all rights reserved. And then when it says U.S. citizen and you have the two bubbles, you have yes or you have no, I click the no bubble. And I had a new driver's license issued with those changes, which the legal term that would be used to describe a change in a contract is the term novation. So I went in and I filed essentially a novation, and then they accepted the novation, and when they issued the new driver's license. I had that converted driver's license or novation driver's license, or however you want to say it, for about a year and a half. And then I recently turned it in to have it, what was the word they use? They use, I forget the name of the word. It's hilarious. It's like succeeded or something stupid or sacrificed or something. So I gave up the driver's license entirely because I feel like it's more of a burden now than it is a helpful thing. I think the driver's license is essentially the modern day star that they would put on the Jews during the Holocaust, which I know is a very strong terminology, but the driver's license essentially naturalizes you into the District of Columbia because state of California, state of Utah, state of Texas, these are all corporations that are physically located in the District of Columbia, just like the term United States.
Yeah.
So you have the term California Republic, or in Texas, it was originally called the Republic of Texas. That's the unincorporated zone.
Right.
And then you have state of California or state of Texas, which would be a corporation located in the District of Columbia. And when you confer the nationality of state of Texas via the driver's license. So what happened is you didn't need a driver's license. Then because you signed up for a driver's license and naturalized into the District of Columbia, now you actually need it.
Right. Right. And that's a pretty wild rabbit hole too. I remember I went down this one like 3.5-4 years back, that technically is a driver is someone who is conducting commerce on the roadways, according to Black's Law's dictionary.
Title 49.
Yeah. Title 49.
So in Title 49, the definition of the term driver is a person who operates a commercial motor vehicle.
Yeah. It's pretty wild though. So because it's essentially saying that you are not a driver and you don't need a driver's license unless you're conducting commerce on the roadway. So if you're driving like an Uber or something like that, that would apply.
The exact terminology is you have to be transporting, and they use 3 words. They use persons, cargo, or property for compensation.
Yeah.
That is the exact terminology.
Right.
Now it gets more complicated because it would need to be transporting persons, cargo, or property within the territorial boundaries of the United States. I don't usually get into that too much because it's like then just going to be too crazy for people.
Right, because that would mean only in the District of Columbia.
Only in an unknown area.
In the unknown area. Yeah, in the unknown area.
So it gets goofy.
I guess to be safe, we could just say like, dude, if
but you live there because you say you live there.
Right, exactly.
You contract into the traffic codes. For example, in California, it's the CVC, which is the California Vehicle Code, because you have naturalized by conferring the nationality of state of California upon yourself after birth by any means whatsoever into a corporation called State of California, which is physically located in the District of Columbia. So you didn't need a driver's license until you got the driver's license.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is where, as you're learning this, you really have to be careful. And we should have been anyway with the documents that we're signing and really reading what they say and like,
Well, the wording is so brilliant and tricky. Right. It's so brilliant. I mean, if you think about how all this was put together, it's just like the most maniacal, brilliant. It's like you see in these old cartoons we used to watch as a kid, or I used to watch as a kid, like you have the brilliant mad scientist that's like super intelligent, always trying to figure out how to like enslave or ensnarl the protagonist or whatever.
Yeah.
It's the same. We're living it. You know what I mean? People think that video games, even like the X-Men or like Spider-Man or whatever. It's like the Kingpin is the big, huge monster guy with the cane and the suit.
Yeah. And
he's just a rich psychopath.
Right.
And it's like, it's so funny. You have it's all like this. And then you wake up to the thing, the idea that everything you've ever seen your whole life, every book, every video game, every movie could possibly be the same as the reality we're living in. It's like somehow unrealistic. No, it's just, it's the same exact thing.
Right.
We're living the same exact thing. This is not some sort of, and then you think to yourself, well, then you go down the intent rabbit hole, and you could say, did they design Hollywood to essentially make the exact existence of which we live in seem to be some sort of externalized illusion,
right,
on purpose to get people away from the fact that, hey, you're living, this is exactly how you're living. It's all the same. You're
right.
living it.
And that's where it's such a rabbit hole. Or like for those who are aware of like what we say is the intention, at the least we see that there is a lot of things that are seeded into movies and TV shows that would indicate to me that like, there's someone who knows, and they're like maybe karmically required to reveal what they're doing, or they're like just trying to troll us. But for those of us who are in this alternative leaning community, I look at that as them trolling us. And also, if we're coming from the idea that our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs to a certain spectrum help influence the reality that we experience, they're actually helping to get us to perpetually focus on that so that we also bring about more of it.
The coercion of the change in our minds is the linchpin to the entire system.
Absolutely. Amen. Totally agree.
And the words are the source code of that coercion mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which,
totally agree, man. There's two big concepts that I want to touch on for the rest of this, and that's this jurisdictional issue as it applies to taxation, and then I want to circle back and touch on the Emergency Banking Act, and just briefly touch on currency a little bit, and also I guess touching on what backs the currency, for lack of a better term. So which one would you like to touch on first? Let's go to taxation. Okay. So what when you correct your status, and you have, come up with a great definition for that, it's just all based on naturalization, and it's basically
identity and naturalization, location. That's how I break it down, right? So.
Right. So who does taxation apply to?
Resident aliens or U.S. citizens?
Okay.
Well, or non-resident aliens who have income from sources within the United States.
And that's where it gets a little bit sticky. But
no, because how do you define income? Because money, quote unquote, is a Federal Reserve note. Federal Reserve note is a promissory note. It's a negotiable instrument. So it doesn't have any intrinsic value.
So would you say if you're operating an LLC, as an example, that would be receiving income from an entity that is within the United States government jurisdiction because it's receiving limited liability coverage from the corporate entity that is the United States government?
If you've ever said that particular corporation is located in state of Texas or United States, then it's by definition naturalized.
But you can go
the nationality of the state of Texas. So when you opened it, you conferred that it was being opened in state of Texas. So you conferred the nationality of state of Texas upon a person, corporation,
right,
after birth by any means whatsoever.
But then you can just amend your documents thereafter and say, no, I'm moving
no, you
my
wouldn't
LLC.
amend anything. You would just issue a new conference of nationality.
Okay, yeah, by
right
any
now,
means, by any means,
right now.
Okay.
You can move that damn thing around.
That's the part that is so crazy to me, is that last line that says "by any means."
Yep.
Like that is like
by any means. Yep.
Crazy to me.
I know
Just
everybody.
Like,
that's why, like I was saying the other day when we were doing the in person. It's like, well, wait a second. What if I blah 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 blah? Everybody always does that. What if I had a Lego
What's
piece?
The craziest
and then
one you've heard?
I don't even listen.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I just hear blah 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 blah. And then I go, oh, magically, amazingly, that would actually fit within the definition of
the definition by any means.
By any means necessary. Yeah. What if I had a hawk and I trained the hawk, and then it was like a carrier hawk, and then it's like, it's like Pablo Escobar when he was in that prison, and they sent out the pigeons with the little notes attached to their leg, and that would fit, and that would fit into by any means whatsoever, right? So you have the 26 Code of Federal Regulations, section 1.871-1. For purposes of the income tax, alien individuals, which is also kind of interesting, alien, they're always alien. Even if they're resident aliens.
Yeah.
Which is a whole nother thing that is kind of fascinating, right? Alien individuals are divided generally into two classes, namely resident aliens and non-resident aliens. So a resident alien, which is kind of weird because they use the word alien there too. It's interesting, right?
What is the significance of that in your mind?
I believe, and this is
all
circumstantial.
Did they ever define it in Black's Law or anything like that?
Yeah, they give definitions. Are very convoluted. I think the way that it works is, so the term domicile means that you actually live in a location. Right. The term resident means it's a temporary area where you do actually, in fact, live.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you're there for business-related purposes or pleasure-related purposes, and you intend to return to your domicile.
Mm-hmm.
So resident alien, basically the way that I believe the tax code is written is that legally no one can domicile in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
They can only be a resident alien. So it's somebody who temporarily has moved into a location who intends to return to their domicile.
Would you say that, again, I know this is getting picky with it, but that also applies to just people who are U.S. citizens who have not basically naturalized out of the United States?
Well, there's also a section of the United States Code that says that anyone living in the United States is assumed to be a officer or employee of the United States. And then there's another one where any United States citizen found outside of the United States is assumed to be operated in for the purpose of subpoenas and summons in the District of Columbia. So it's an interesting conversation. It's always alien, 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 alien.
Right.
And I think the reason for that is because legally you cannot domicile there.
Wow.
And I think one of the reasons why they do that is because the federal government only has jurisdiction over commercial activities, and the term resident has right in it that it could possibly be for business purposes.
Wow.
So what's amazing is that all of this fits together.
Right.
Every time you keep going and you keep studying, that's why there's a lot of things in my I don't know category. I feel like I just haven't plugged it into the right place. I feel like everything, the most amazing thing about all this, which does prove intent, by the way, is the fact that someone has to know somewhere, because there's no other way that all this would fit together like this. It all
fits together like a perfect puzzle. It really does.
Like a perfect puzzle. It's a giant puzzle.
It is a huge puzzle.
But it all fits together.
It's complex because it goes into banking, it goes into U.S. codes of federal regulation, even borrowing from common law, multiple law forms, land, air, and sea. Like, it goes in so many different directions. Understanding IRS like codes. There's so much, and it all fits in this like perfect puzzle.
So we have resident aliens and non-resident aliens. It says here, resident alien individuals are, in general, taxable the same as citizens of the United States. So as far as I can tell, a citizen of the United States is a volunteer employee or officer of the United States federal corporation. A resident alien is somebody who may not work directly for the district, the United States government, but they have naturalized into this unknown location called United States. Okay. It says here, resident alien individuals are in general taxable the same as citizens of the United States. That is, a resident alien is taxable on income derived from all sources, including sources without the United States. That's what everybody thinks they are, right? Then you scroll down a little farther and it says here, this is where naturalization plugs in. However, non-resident alien individuals may elect to be treated as U.S. residents for purposes of determining their income tax liability. So in Title 8, they say naturalization. And then, as far as I'm concerned, naturalization translated into the Internal Revenue Code, Title 26, is called an election. I believe it's the same thing. You're electing to be treated as a U.S. resident. And the way that you elected to be treated as a U.S. resident is you signed a W-9 tax form, which says that you declare under penalty of perjury, which, by the way, is included in by any means whatsoever for naturalization. You are declaring under penalty of perjury that you are a U.S. citizen or other U.S. person, which you can elect to do.
Right.
And so essentially you subscribed to taxes. It's a subscription service.
Right.
And you subscribe to it by naturalizing or electing to be treated as a U.S. resident for the purposes of determining your income tax liability.
Right. So that means that in order to not have a tax liability, you would do essentially what?
We call it a revocation of election, which is an exact term from Title 26. Now, as I've learned more and more over the years, there's many different types of revoking of election. There's many different types of election in different areas and different things. You can elect to be married and how that works, and you can elect to be treated as one entity in your taxation. So there's many different areas of election that people are actually familiar with. But this one specifically, if you were to give it the full name, it would be a revocation of election to be treated as a U.S. resident for the purposes of determining your income tax liability.
Mm.
That's the exact word for word verbatim terminology that you would use to describe this particular activity of unsubscribing from Netflix, otherwise known as the tax system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh man, that's so crazy because it's like it really is that simple.
It really is that simple.
It's that simple.
And all the craziness and the tax code being 9,000 trillion billion pages long, and then they have the Internal Revenue Manual, the IRM, which is 8 billion pages long in terms of how they operate internally. It's all just one giant smokescreen. The whole thing, A to Z.
Well, you could say the same thing about the U.S. codes and codes of federal regulations too, because it's just all intentionally complex and overly robust. Because it's like, oh, they want to turn away people who would be looking into this. Like, how does this all make sense? Like, too much for me to look at. And then legalese is literally like another language, essentially.
And
right?
the funny thing is too, is you start getting into litigation and you peel back this whole other part of the onion, which is my favorite part of the onion in the whole world, which is you see all these laws and you see all these words and you assume you can't understand it because you're so stupid.
Right.
That's the first assumption. Then the second assumption is you assume that bar card attorneys do understand all this information and they've got it all under control and you have to go to them if you want anything done. Then you peel back that onion and you realize there isn't a freaking bar card on the planet that understands any of this information or knows any of it. The way that the bar cards work is they all do backroom deals and phone call deals, and they threaten you and they coerce you into giving yourself up and they give you deals. It's all like straight up like mafia negotiation intimidation. That's like 99%. And then you have a trial attorney, someone who actually goes to trial and does trial attorney. Like in terms of like my opinion of the attorney world, the only real attorney that knows anything about anything would be a trial attorney, because they actually have to go in there and present actual information and we'll talk about things. Everything else is just totally up in the air. Very few people know hardly anything about anything. They use case law. Case law is basically an interpretation of law that was previously completed. That's really my definition of case law. I actually can't stand it. I think it's trash. I don't want a previous interpretation of the statute. Why don't we, as intelligent individuals, interpret the statutes right now and the definitions of the words together, live, this very minute? I don't need a previous stupid bunch of clowns interpretation of what is stated here. You and I and the prosecution or the defense can figure it out right now live, but that's not how the system works. It works off case law because nobody knows. Nobody has an idea. Nobody wants to know. Right. They want to trick their clients into God knows what, get paid as much as they can as quickly as possible, and go do blow off a hooker's ass. That is the legal system. So that's the second part of the layer is that lawyers don't know a fucking thing about anything.
Right. I mean, I think that's the whole point. Just like medical doctors, not all of them, but for the most part, I mean, Andy Kaufman and all the doctors I'm friends with would 100% agree with what I'm about to say, is that medical doctors don't know a damn thing about health.
They did a long time ago.
Long time ago, absolutely. And a long time ago,
in the legal field, I don't think
ago.
they did. I don't think so. No. I think common law, you don't need attorneys.
That's a good point. That's
all
a
you do is
point.
that you have your little sheriff. You know, the Wild West movies, especially after you learn a lot of this information, are very fascinating because I think that they so shockingly, I don't know how, I guess historical studies, I think that they're very accurate actually.
Right.
Like let's say for example, you're in the Wild West and it's 18 whatever. And you get pissed at some guy at the saloon and you're gonna shoot each other. And they have these descriptions in these old films where everyone goes inside, they lock the door, they duck under the thing and they want to look out the window. And the sheriff just verifies that stray bullets are not going to kill children and women. But the way that it's operated from the sheriff's perspective is if this man would like to contract with this man in a duel, who am I to stop that from occurring?
Right.
My job is not to stop the free right to contract. My job is to stop Jane and Sally and this little boy from getting hit by stray bullets. So they all go inside, they close the doors, and then they have the bear, and they have the they have the wow, wow, wow. You know, they have the and they do their
Shows
paces.
One dude's eye where it's like zoomed in on his eye.
Yep.
He's doing this whole thing.
They do their paces, and you also think too. It's like downtown area is usually just a strip, and it's buildings on one side and building on the other, and then the road extends out of the downtown area, right? So he's going to shoot this way. He's going to shoot this way. He tries to set it up. The sheriff wants to make sure he sets it up in a way where hopefully buildings and stuff don't get hit, and the chances of someone getting hit if they're more toward the center is low because they're shooting down range, right? So he sets it all up, you know, and it's a spectacle of the year, right, for the whole town. It's like a UFC fight, which UFC fights the same thing. Exactly. There's no one stepping in saying, boys, you can't do that, blah, blah, blah. They'll kill each other, and there's no legal repercussions. Right. The same exact thing, right? And the sheriff's, you know, they depict the sheriff as sitting in his room, and he goes out, and even the villains are, hey, sheriff, how you doing? You know, because the thing is that until enough of the people in town get irritated about the behavior of someone and they're doing something bad that's harming and damaging a lot of the people in the town, then what does he do? All right, he gets up, he gets on his horse, he rides out there, he lassos them, brings them into town. How does it work? They get put into a little courtroom, or they get put up on a thing. And it's like, well, what do you guys want to do with this? And it's like the jury,
town decides, right?
The town decides.
Right,
the town decides.
Right.
Hang him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then what do? They take him out in the town square and they hang him. Or they,
like Ralph,
they have the stocks.
Ralph's a good guy. Like I know him personally, and a bunch of us know him personally.
And that's how old trials took place, right?
Which makes so much more sense than any
a trial
of,
of your peers.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So the thing is that, you know, you got to be careful with that too. What if you just ride in a town and you start doing shit? Now it's going to be, you're going to get tried by the people who don't know you that well. They kind of know you. It's like, oh yeah, this guy came into town 3 days ago. He's been nothing but an asshole the whole time. That's all they know. That's not going to work very well for you. But you have the stocks. Let's say, for example, someone's sentenced to stocks. So it's like, now you're in the stocks and you're in, let's say you cheated on your husband and you like messed up a bunch of relationships and families and you caused a bunch of emotional heartache in town. They'll take the man or the woman, they'll put them in the stocks in the square, and you can throw tomatoes at them or whatever. They just make shit up too. It's like whatever they felt like was the proper whatever, that would be what would occur. And that was just that simple. That's how it worked, you know? Right.
You know, it's interesting too, because again, speaking to the voluntarist community that I would consider myself to be a part of, that's what we're wanting to get back to, is more like a more decentralized form of I guess you could say organizing as people that is based in the non-aggression principle, which is literally right in line with common law, as we've said.
Yes.
And it's that when you look at it from that lens, those people in that area, you talk about this guy that's riding in on a horse that's a brand new guy in town, the people that are living in that area have already set up a mutually agreed upon standard for how that community operates. Like they have come together as a community and agreed voluntarily, like this is how I'm going to, like, we are going to engage as a community. If you don't like it, you are free to leave this community and go to another community. But what's so interesting about that is when you learn this stuff, overwhelmingly, we already do have a voluntary system. We're already living in a voluntarist system, because when you learn the game as you have and as I have, you learn that, oh, I am free to leave it. You know, I might have some issues here and there with people who are working as agents of the state who aren't aware of the full nature of the game themselves. But for the most part, I can handle that as long as I'm living in honor and in peace. But the point is, it is already a voluntary system. I don't have to be under the jurisdiction of the U.S. government if I don't want to be, based on my own voluntary willingness to get out of it and no longer do it anymore.
Yeah, and there's two specific areas that I can UN Declaration of Human Rights. So I know, again, the UN, we all know that there's definitely some interesting, possible, you know, nefarious, whatever intent and all the good stuff there, but it's a large organization. I don't think every single man, woman, and child knows all of that. Okay, but anyways, if you go to Article 15 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and it's subsection 1 is everyone has the right to a nationality. And subsection 2 is no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality, nor denied the right to change his nationality. So you start
Right.
thinking with the fact that when you learn all this stuff and you start learning it, what's occurring is that you're operating in common law, but statutorily what you're doing is you're operating in international law.
Right.
International
Right.
international law, right? So the thing is that when you confer the nationality of a state, which the word state and nation are the same word, upon a person after birth by any means whatsoever, no one can stop you from doing that. And if they do, it would be an international human rights violation.
Right. And what people will say is that, well, what does this even matter? Why do we even have to turn to them for their codes and regulations?
No, I just do that for that because a lot of people on the ground level,
I agree. I'm going to make a point here because I completely agree with what you're doing. It's like, no. Let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. What this is saying is that they readily recognize all of these things that we are trying to get to. So don't just cast all of it aside, because then you are still unwittingly engaging in contracts with them. And then when they infringe upon you, pointing them, being like, look how big and bad they are. Right?
I feel like it's all about gradients. So your typical guy on the street has been programmed through a multi, I don't even know the financial term. It's above trillions. It's quadrillion, dollar industry.
An actual number?
Dollar industry where from your entire life you are poisoned and destroyed and beaten and suppressed and made to be, it's amazing how large and the system is. And it's amazing anyone is even walking upright. That's why I have a very different opinion about how good or bad man is. For man to be pretty well good and for us to have a community where you're not shooting at each other. It doesn't look like Mad Max walking out your front door, even though that there's literally poison in everything. You can't even breathe. You can't even exist without being something oppressive occurring to you in some way, shape, or form. It's amazing to me that anyone can do anything. We're all brainwashed about authority more than anything, right? For the guy on the street, he still needs to see something within the confines of the system that he's used to that gives him the permission that he feels he requires in order to take that step. And then I believe from that point, the next step is to realize what you're talking about, which is, why are we a part of the system? Why are we all? So I try to teach it in a 2-step system.
Right.
Step number 1 is I want to show you what gives you permission to be free. You're going to be terrified. Then you're going to take that step now that you've been given permission as a brainwashed individual. Now, once you're outside of that system, and you're operating outside of that system, and some time has gone by and the CIA has not broken through your skylight, now at that point, that is the next realization that you will come across, which is a full and utter disconnection from all of that, even because you realize that even that is, in fact, truthfully unnecessary.
Right. It's interesting because I was learning voluntarist, libertarian, anarcho-capitalist principles the same time as I was learning a lot of this common law stuff. So it's like my growth has been in both worlds. I really only publicly share the voluntary side of things because I think what you're pointing to is the biggest, the largest obstacle for people to overcome, in that we look at the entity that is government. It is literally just comprised of men and women, and they only have authority over us by our own, again, contractual obligations, some that we're not, aware of initially, and some that we are aware of, but we continue to contract with them. But I think most importantly, based on our own conditioned belief that we look at them as this big, bad, scary thing that, they have the right to do this to me. They have the moral right to do this to me, and I have a moral obligation to comply with anything that they tell me to do. And again, that goes back to the school system, because as it has evolved, that is what is created. A bunch of people who, how do you get good grades in school? It's not by actually learning for the most part. It's by just regurgitating what a teacher, what an authority figure is telling you, and just learning to regurgitate that by being a good student, by standing up when you're told to, by doing the Pledge of Allegiance, by only using the bathroom, exercising a bodily function when you are told that you can. And that's what has created this. And I think that is the biggest thing that we need to dissolve, is the idea that other men and women, irrespective of title, have any right to tell us what to do.
Yeah, I think if we were to go as deep as I've been able to take it so far, the way that I look at it is the control mechanism is only possible through the false manufacturing of blame, shame, and regret. So the thing is that, let's say, for example, the tax code. So you're paying for the country, you're paying for the roads, you're paying for people will freak out on you and say you can't stop paying taxes. And the reason why they're doing that is because they, in their mind, feel that you are breaking the help that their country actually needs, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
There's nothing actually wrong with that at all. That's actually, it comes down to a subject of intent. Again, is there intent to harm the United States from that thinking pattern? No. They're basing their thinking pattern based off of a shame, blame, and regret system that has been programmed into their mind. Have they ever seen evidence to the fact that this is true? That is the problem. Have they ever requested evidence to the fact that this is true? When I give $16,000 to the Internal Revenue Service, which is essentially a debt collection agency, of which its primary client is the United States Treasury, and the headquarters for this collection agency is located in Puerto Rico, which is not part of the United States of America at all. And if you look up the definition of court of the United States, it specifically says does not include tax courts. So it's actually literally an abstract of a fiction that even within the fiction says it's not part of the original fiction. That's how silly.
Have you gone down the Trust 62 rabbit hole?
No.
Okay. Yeah, that's another one that the IRS is technically a corporation that is owned in part by Trust 62, which is based out of Puerto Rico.
There is they call it the Philippines Trust or whatever the hell it's called. Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that in the United States Code.
It's wild when you find that too. Like you can find it.
And that trust that they say that trust is composed only of gifts and all estate and income taxes gifts.
It's all a gift.
I think that's in 3806, 26 USC 3806.
I don't know. You're so sharp with we're referring back to the US.
So the whole system is based on, they manufacture an illusion, and that illusion creates loyalty through contributing.
Yes.
So they get you to contribute in, and once that of which you contribute to enters the mind, that of which enters the mind must be defended. So it's all psychological. It's psychological warfare, right? Yeah. So it's how do we create a shame, blame, or regret-based reaction that causes the other person to contribute to a system of which then they internalize, of which then they need to defend.
Right.
This is where intent is so important, though, because you say, I'm not paying taxes anymore, and a boomer, dad or grandpa, freaks out on you because he's been programmed his whole life that paying taxes means that you are contributing to the system. So what is that actual mechanism? It's shame, blame, regret.
Right.
You are triggering shame, blame, and regret it. Now, what happens is once you have the shame, blame, or regret system in place, now to not pay taxes is a moral or ethical paying. And now after you've had the moral or ethical paying, you open the door to the consequences that have now occurred from that moral, ethical paying. So the only way that they can do all that is they have to get you into the thing, contribute to the thing, internalize the thing, defend the thing, then go against the thing of which they have created whatever rules that now harm that thing, make you feel as though you've harmed good people.
Right.
And now what do? You open the door and you put the noose around yourself and you hang yourself.
Right, man. Right.
It's all voluntary.
It's like the crabs in a bucket.
It's all voluntary.
Yeah, you're right. It's absolutely.
And it's
all
not.
voluntary.
It's not. I know the crabs in the bucket thing. I get to throw that a lot. It's not the crabs in the bucket thing, because the thing is that Grandpa wants the United States to do well.
Right.
He actually doesn't want to destroy the United States.
Right. That's a good point.
He doesn't.
That's a good
He
point.
thinks that if you stop paying, because
okay, I guess maybe the best thing is Agent Smith syndrome. Like,
it's kind of like
closer to that,
because Grandpa wants the United States to do well.
Right.
He wants the roads, and as he gets older, typically people start thinking about the new generation. So what they're thinking is that you're destroying your children.
Right.
His grandchildren are being destroyed because they're not going to enjoy the same benefits that he paid into his entire life. It's actually very unselfish.
Right.
And when you untangle all this, you start to realize that the entire legal system is based on the fact that everyone is evil and that everyone needs to be held in place. Otherwise, all the demons will be released into the streets. When in actuality, when you break down the intentions and the ideas and the mentalities of all these people and why they do the things that they do. All they want to do is help and make a better world.
That's so true. But it's all based on the unproven assumption that people are inherently evil, essentially.
That's correct.
Right. That's what I think. And I mean, there's other assumptions, but I think that is a huge one right there too. So I want to touch, so let me ask this. When it comes to being a taxpayer, I'm trying to figure out how I want to.
What's the definition of taxpayer? Do you know it?
Yeah. Okay. So you said you just go with it.
So it's 26 USC 7701 subsection A14.
Uh-huh.
Definition of taxpayer is any person, which could be an estate, a partnership, association, individual, company, corporation, any person that is subject to any internal revenue tax.
Mm-hmm.
So a taxpayer is somebody who would fit underneath that of which would need to pay taxes.
Right.
And the way that they call that is tax liability.
Mm-hmm.
So you could redefine the term taxpayer to say a person who has a tax liability.
Mm-hmm.
The way a person has a tax liability is by electing or naturalizing into the United States, which is located in the District of Columbia.
Right. Right.
And that's the way that the term taxpayer actually breaks down.
And then this is where it's amazing to articulate that to, grandpa, and say to him, like, look, no. I'm not just saying fuck off. I'm no longer a citizen of the United States. Like
the way you'd handle grandpa is you'd say, Grandpa, you're so positive that all the money that's being paid into the Internal Revenue Service is going into the country, but there's actually literally internal report. I think it's called the Grain Year Report.
Right.
There's literally internalized reports that are done that say that due to extreme waste, the entire income tax is part of it goes to pay the interest on the loan, but the remaining part of it, which is a huge part of it, is just essentially just wasted. They talk about how it's literally just wasted. So
we don't
it goes
really know
into the
for
IRS
sure where
and
it
it just
goes.
kind of vanishes.
Right, because we don't really know actually where it goes,
Yeah.
because the IRS is its own sub weird abstract agency of the U.S. government, and it is based.
It's not really part of the U.S. government.
That's the thing, right? It's not a government.
But when they
agency.
call you,
it
literally comes up on caller ID. I wasn't shocked, but I was also very shocked. It comes up because I call them and I need EIN numbers for trust and stuff like that, and they call me back. And I have a great relationship with the IRS. Actually, I always tell people the IRS is probably the only organization I'll never sue because they actually follow the law very well. But no one else does. They're the only organization that actually does, which I know is very shocking.
Right.
But one of the things that come up on the caller ID is US space GOVT.
Wow.
But it's just a DBA.
Yeah. Okay.
I could DBA I could have a corporation called Starbucks, and I could DBA US GVMT.
Yeah. Interesting.
And then if somebody asked me, what is this? I would say, G stands for going very, I could make up some, whatever. And the thing is that what are you going to do? You're going to prove that I have the intent to, you can go down you could DBA for $10 and you can get a USGVMT. You could do it. It's literally just manufacturing authority through the usage of words, terms, and phrases.
Yeah. So I want to circle back now that we've covered the tax thing, right? Because again, it's all based in jurisdiction. So again, we have the 14th Amendment, the Organic Act, the redefining of person, and the basically incorporating the U.S. government in the District of Columbia. But then we have the creation of the Federal Reserve, right, which is a whole monster in and of itself, which I don't think we have time to get into during this. But then after that, we have the Emergency Banking Act, and then thereafter, the currency went off of the gold standard. And so what a lot of people now will say is that fiat money is just silly money. And yes, that is true to a large degree because it's not actually true. It's not money as we previously knew it in centuries back, right?
You know the definition of money?
You do. I know. I know it in my head, but I don't know how to articulate it well enough. Let me finish this point.
Okay.
But when people say that our currency is backed by nothing, that's actually not entirely true. Again, there's some words have meaning, right? Specific meanings, but in general, it's backed by every time we sign something that becomes a security, and it's ultimately backed by, and there's different schools of thoughts on this, our future labor interest deposit, that is the birth certificate and everything
I
established
believe
thereafter.
that's true. Do I have like 100% full? I have like mountains of circumstantial evidence that prove that. Do I have like straight up a code I could give you that says that? Not particularly, but I also believe that's what it is. Yes.
Right.
And I believe it's tied into the Social Security system because in
Social Security is basically like an
1933,
EIN.
yeah, 1933, it took away all the gold and silver, or mostly took away all the gold and silver. It wasn't until 71 that they like fully obliterated it entirely, 100%. But the bigger blow, the first monster blow, which was a huge part of it, was the Emergency Banking Act of 1933. We have the Social Security Act of 1935. So even just the time periods alone is possible, really good proof and evidence that all kind of occurred right around the same time, where they stopped backing the Federal Reserve note, or, well, I guess, yeah, it'd be the Federal Reserve note with gold and silver coin, and they replaced it with something else. And then you say, like, well, what did they replace it with? Well, a year and a half later, they passed the Social Security Act. So it's not, do I have like, this is what it says, here it is, black and white, here you go? No. But when you look at the circumstantial evidence, it's no different than trying to prove intent without, if someone doesn't tell you they have the intent, how are you going to, there's no way you can prove directly that they have the intent. So when you study court cases and they're proving intent, it's just a fucking assload of circumstantial evidence. And there's just so much of it, and they piece it all together. And it's like, well, that's how you can't prove intent any other way. There's no book unless they get an old journal of yours and it says, I intend to blow this, do this.
Right.
So the thing is that, so the thing is, it's the same idea. It's just a ton of circumstantial evidence, and then you build the case based off of the circumstantial evidence. But more importantly, you have the definition of the term money. The definition of the term money means gold and silver coins. And if you look it up in Black's Law, it says does not embrace notes, bills of exchange, evidences of debt, right? Then you look up the term currency and you look up the term funds, and it says gold and silver coins, plus it also includes promissory notes, bills of exchange, evidences of debt. So the term money would not be used for a Federal Reserve note because the word note is a shortening for promissory note. So it's actually a security, or what we call here in the UCC, we call it negotiable instrument. So an instrument is a deed or a contract, very simple word actually. And then the term negotiable means that it's very easily transferable from person to person to person, and it keeps its value. So like if I wrote a check to you, I couldn't give it to this guy over here because he couldn't do anything with it.
Yeah.
So that's actually called a non-negotiable instrument. And if you have a checkbook and it has the carbon copies, if you look at the carbon copies of your checkbook, it'll say on the bottom right, non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but if you take a check and it says pay to the order of, which is the left side where you write the name of who you're writing the check to. If you look at your checks, it says pay to the order of. It always says that. That's the actual legal terminology from the Bill of Exchange Act. If you write bearer in that line, that means that you just created your own cash. Because now let's say you put $5 on your check and then you write bearer and then you sign it. Your bank account becomes the backing of that negotiable instrument. That negotiable instrument is worth $5 to anyone who bears the instrument. So I can give it to you. I can give it to him. It can go for 100 years without ever being deposited. Because intrinsically, as long as people trust the fact that I have some negotiable instruments, that's where it's really goofy. Because it just promises on, and then there's and then it just fizzles into nothing. Because
it's like a promise to
there's
pay
nothing
at some
there.
future date.
You're literally promising to pay, promises to pay.
You're right. Exactly.
That's the system that we live in, right?
Yeah, like ad infinitum as well. Like just in some future date, it's going to happen. Right? It's going to pay you.
So as long as you believe that I am trustable enough to have 5 promises in my promise account for your promises, then no one may ever go and try to deposit those promises and get those promises with the promise. So the thing is that you can just negotiate that instrument, which means exchange that instrument, or the style in which an instrument is exchanged, or however, negotiation or negotiable or negotiating has to do, that term doesn't have anything to do with the normal definition of the word negotiate that everybody thinks of, which is to, go back and forth and work out a price on something or the way a deal is supposed to be, has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the way in which, style in which, or conditions or instructions associated with the exchanging or manufacturing of an instrument of which has some sort of value or intrinsic value.
Mm.
So the way that I define cash, like for example, I have some cash here, which, what is this? It's a negotiable instrument. It's a promissory note that essentially is payable to the bearer, right? So I can exchange it with you and you can exchange it with somebody else and you can move it around because it's a note that everyone trusts in the value of. But intrinsically, it's $20 of what?
Right. And that's the question.
It's $20 of promises.
Right.
Okay. And that 20 promises is a promise of what? 20 promises.
Right.
And and that 20 promises is a promise for what? If you keep asking, it's a very childish.
It is.
How, Daddy? Well, it's
Why?
How,
Why?
Daddy?
Right.
How does that, Daddy?
Right.
Eventually, where do you end up?
You just end up.
Who knows, dude?
Right,
I don't know.
Exactly. You just end up saying,
one knows.
I don't know.
And the way that the system was born is through the 1933 Emergency Banking Act, because the 1933 Emergency Banking Act extended infinite credit to everyone because they took away all the ability to pay, which is the gold and silver coins. Now, what is the definition of the term credit?
You got it.
Permission to defer a payment to a later date.
Right.
We all have infinite permission to defer all payments to any later date. That's what the Emergency Banking Act gave us.
Yeah.
Now you have to ask yourself, now payment is another really strange definition. People think payment means to send in a Federal Reserve note. It couldn't be farther from the truth. Federal Reserve notes have nothing to do with anything, really. The definition of payment is to perform on a duty, obligation, or contract.
So even if like the IRS sends you a presentment and they say they're, quote, ordering you to pay, they're ordering you to perform.
Yep. Everything in the whole world is performance. It's not, a payment is performance. And because we have the right since 1933 to defer performing to a later date, infinitely, to any later date, to perform, all you have to do is simply flex the right to defer the payment to a later date.
Right.
So all everyone is doing is just deferring all of their performances to a later date, but they don't know that they're doing it. So what happens is that you have a credit card. The credit card is, you put it in, you promise to pay that thing with other promises to pay, which are promises to pay of nothing. So the thing is that the whole thing is just a joke on top of a joke on top of a joke. You have the infinite capacity to defer performance forever. And if you look up 18 USC 8, is one of the most mind-blowing things in the whole world, and it plugs into this. It took me a long time to understand this. So if you look up 18 USC 8, it's called Obligations or Other Securities of the United States. And it says that every single promissory note, every single Federal Reserve note, every single bill of exchange, every single bill is all obligations or other securities of the United States. So the way it works is when we defer payment to a later date, which we can do as much as we want to an infinite capacity and no one can tell us no. That's how you can access all the credit you want. You want credit cards, they say no, and it's in the United States Code. No, since 1933, they can't tell you no.
Wow.
They can offer you a no that you can accept, but they actually can't legally tell you no. If they say no and you say no to their no, they have to say yes.
Wow. Wow.
So we all have the infinite capacity to defer performance to a later date. Now, the thing is that that's what credit is. And that's basically how the whole system works. And you ask yourself, okay, well, if we're deferring payment, who are we deferring payment to? The United States, 18 USC 8. They're responsible.
Wow.
So all your bills are all bills of the United States. All you have to do is just say, I'm not performing on this till a later date. The United States can take care of it. And no one can say no. They can't stop you from deferring the payment. And the United States can't stop you deferring the payment to them.
Wow. Man, it's as you get deep, there's so many other threads that I want to pull on. There's so many, but like we've already gone 2 hours and 15 minutes. I mean, like, dude, you and I have had so many conversations. You know, there's like so many other threads I want to pull on within this. We might just have to do a part 2 and then a part 3 and a part 4, something like that, or I can just refer people to your contract killer course. But
I'm here for a while, and like I said, I have a bunch of open days. So
yeah, we might have to do that honestly because this might need a part 2 and a part 3. But man. Let's end with this for now, and then we'll get back to that because there's so much more to touch on with credit and discharging and things like this. And also, we didn't even touch on this, that the birth certificate is a security that is traded on the Fidelity Stock Exchange, and it has a QSIP. You can pull it down. You can see how much money is accrued. And that also goes for basically any court case, literally any commercial paper in the United States.
Even the pink slip to your car.
Even the pink slip to your car.
Because if you look on the pink slip to your car, it says certificate of title. Certificate means copy of something that is located elsewhere.
Right.
And then you look at what are you? You're the registered owner.
Right.
And then you look up literally, you can type in Black's Law definition of registered owner into Google, and it'll come up and it'll say someone who has a security interest in something.
Right. Exactly.
It's literally, all there. Everything is there. The certificate of title, if you clear up all the definitions of all the words on the face of the title, you'll realize it's security.
Right.
Not to mention the fact that it's on fucking bond paper. It's right
I know,
there.
It's literally on bond paper.
It's right there.
So I had this thing for my membership that I mentioned to you that we're going over a lot of this in pretty good detail. And someone wrote in the chat that, I looked on my son's birth certificate because, some of those birth certificates will say which bank it was filed through, right?
The older ones especially, yeah.
Right, the older ones. But on some of the newer ones, did you know this? You have to take like a magnifying glass and then you can see it in like really, 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 really tiny letters.
Doesn't shock me terribly.
Yeah. And
I didn't know that though.
I didn't know that until she said that too. I was like, oh my God. So it's still there. It's just in like really, 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 really tiny microscopic print, and you have to have a magnifying glass to see it.
Makes sense because they have to put it there, but they don't want you seeing it.
Exactly. They don't want you knowing that it's a banknote. Yeah. So it's there's so many other things we could go down, but in general, that like the meta concept here is that largely my audience is people who are interested in freedom, and this is freedom. This is literally what this is, and it's
infinite money and diplomatic immunity. It's basically like playing Grand Theft Auto, and you do infinite money, infinite guns, infinite ammo, and God mode all at the same time.
Except for you're a moral person and you're not behaving like the guy in Grand Theft Auto.
You're not psychotic and blowing everything up.
Exactly.
And you can die. Your physical body can die.
Yeah, your physical body.
So God mode in this life only goes so far before
right.
It doesn't work anymore.
Right.
But then you are a being with infinite capacity to create, and in my opinion, in my world, it's that seat of creativity is not tied to the physical body. Mm-hmm. Except through your own decisions and ideas of being tied into that physical body. So you have that whole thing too, which is where then eventually you do hit a point where you do realize it is full God mode at that point. Because then it's
100%, man. Yeah, I totally.
So people always ask, aren't you afraid of dying? Aren't you afraid of this? Aren't you afraid of that? Well, when you really unlock God mode, no, you're not.
Yeah, that's a valid point, especially because, you and I have talked in depth about this, and then like having kids, it presents some challenges or some more conditioning to go back to accessing that who we truly are in our true essence, but you're totally spot on. And I guess I just want to close by saying, especially because we're in 2024, we have quote elections coming up, and like, again, irrespective of whether you believe votes matter or not, and then, from a voluntarist perspective, as I have professed, it is immoral to take someone who you think, like, you don't think you have the right to force other people to do something, but you are saying, oh, I think this person has the right to do that, so he should be in that position. I think that is immoral myself, but all that to say, this path pulls you out of the jurisdiction of the U.S. government. And this ultimately, when a president is the CEO, for lack of a better term, of the U.S. government, which is that corporation. So this really makes voting itself completely obsolete. And I know you teach in your contract killer course, like, hey, if you still want to do that, here are ways that you can engage with voting and then still do all these other things. But the point is that I harp on voting a lot for the various threads of why I think it is just not the correct way to achieve freedom. And this is just one of those examples that you can be free. You can truly be free without ever having to consider who you're going to vote for.
Yeah, you have to be a U.S. citizen to vote, right?
Exactly.
A U.S. citizen has to be located in the District of Columbia.
Right.
But you have an ens legis sitting over here.
Right.
You just take that fucker and send him in there.
Yeah,
he
you send your all caps name
send
to go
the
do
all
it.
caps name in there, and he votes.
Right. If you want to.
So I still teach it, right? You can still vote. And you can go even farther than that. You can take the all caps name. Don't even send him in there. Just naturalize him in there as a non-citizen national himself. When you sign the voter registration, you cross out where it says State of Texas and you write in Republic of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And then the way you sign it is you sign it without prejudice. You say by, and you can sign, comma, man, for all caps name, comma, ens legis.
Yep.
If they accept that contract, the ens legis can vote legally, and the ens legis isn't even physically located in the District of Columbia.
So crazy. That's so crazy. I don't know why you would want to go through all the trouble to do that in the first place.
Well, it just takes a line, a word,
right.
and then you sign in a special way. And then it takes just to understand all of that. It's going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah.
But to actually physically do it, it just takes a couple minutes. Now, not only is the ens legis the person who is voting, but now the ens legis is voting, and the ens legis isn't even in the District of Columbia.
It's so crazy. It's like your all caps name, the corporate fictitious entity that they've set up for you is no longer under their jurisdiction either. That's a whole separate rabbit hole, because there are a lot of remedies that people teach to reclaim this security. That's another rabbit hole for another time. But
there's so many different ways you can go about it. But like I was saying before the show, me personally, while I try so hard to not downplay anything, because I went through a lot of different things. I did a lot of different things. I did tons of really complicated processes near the beginning, but I'm always looking to simplify and get things closer and closer to the most basic definitions and the most basic essence. And the reason why is because we've gotten it down so far now where it's so basic and it's so simple and it's so like this, that the whole system would have to be so redefined and so restructured. Hundreds of years of this system has been around, and we're down so deep into the skeletal structure that the only way that what we're doing wouldn't work is the whole system would need to just be blown up.
We'd have to literally go full blown.
It would need
communist.
to be obliterated.
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
I mean, no, even communism, I think it would still work.
Really?
What I mean is literally it would have to go like full blown, like Mad Max type.
Yeah, got it. Okay, that makes
like the
sense.
whole structure would need to just melt almost into like an anarchy for these things that we're doing, like the negotiable instruments and the bills of exchange and the infinite money stuff, for that to not work anymore. And then with a lot of the nationality stuff, you got to think when you really understand the nationality stuff, you now move from United States law up into international law. So at that point, for that stuff to not work, which is what the United Nations,
whole world would have to go.
The whole world would have to melt down. Every single structure of every single country would need to completely melt into an anarchy.
Yeah.
So I like that. I like to always go like more intrinsic, deeper, closer to the core, more intrinsic, more definitions, the definitions of the words inside the definitions. How do I get closer to that core that's so unshakable that for the rest of my life and my children's lives and my grandchildren and even my great-grandchildren, this is how it's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're doing it, man. And I appreciate the work and the knowledge that you're putting out, and you break it down so clearly. I know we took a different route during this, but we still tied in some of those concepts. I just didn't want to reinvent the wheel and do the exact same.
No, I think this was great.
Okay.
This was very different than what I normally do.
Yeah.
We went in all different sorts of different directions.
I know.
So.
Well, that's what I tend to do. I tend to go off on like tangents all over
Well,
the
the
place.
problem is that this is something that you're very, very into, and it's something that you haven't necessarily shared a ton with your audience.
Right.
So that's why I think we started touching on some things that are so useful that you knew your audience would be like able to put into action immediately. And you're like, we need to deviate to this. because I know it's going to be of such high value to my listeners.
Right. Exactly.
So it's like one of those things where, I would do the same thing. If you start to get some of that and it's like, oh no,
right.
Screw
that's
the history. You're like, let's go. You know what I mean?
Right. And that's where I'm always having to put myself in the minds of the people who are listening, because I'm going to get people across the spectrum of people who are completely new beginners to this, and people who are even more knowledgeable than me that are just wanting a refresher. And I mean, like I said, I even saw that in my membership when we were sharing this stuff. There's people who are sat in on what was a 2.5 hour presentation, which were like, I literally don't know what was just said. And there were some people, like that lady who shared about her son's birth certificate, that knew more than I did. I was like, oh my God, This is incredible. And that's what's so awesome about this, is that we're all teaching each other and we're all learning together in
and
this
it's getting to a point now where, like, for example, this show is going to be a show where you'll have to watch it 5, 10, 15, 20 times. But this one show will take a person 100 times higher than if someone 5 years ago spent 4 years studying the subject.
I know, which is so crazy.
Like the orders of magnitude of which, how this is becoming so much more simplified, and how people are explaining this in new ways, and how they're integrating it into how it actually, they're grounding it to actionability. It's something like this was never available for anyone who's ever published anything on any of these subjects, even just 3 years ago.
So true.
Literally just 3 years ago. James C. Levitt, who's a guy who I care very deeply for. He's been doing this stuff for a long time. He's a little bit more, he's not like an old timer, but he's a little bit more into that category of old timer. And he produces so much stuff on the subject and everything else. And we talked about that on a show I had with him. I'm like, if you would have had the stuff that we have now, you would be 1,000 levels above where you're at now. And he was in full agreement. Everything, the evolution of this whole arc, it's getting so much clearer. It's getting so much easier. It's getting so much more in depth. It's getting so much more skeletal. I mean, literally by the hour. So like the explosiveness of the interest in the material and the assimilation of the material is literally just as sharp of a graph as the simplicity, power, depth. It's just like,
it's going exponential.
It's literally just a rocket ship.
Right.
And the thing, like in another like 6 months to a year, with this whole election and everything else happening, it's just everything is about to change.
100%.
Everything is about to change.
And not because of the election, but by virtue of people seeing all that nonsense and just being like, okay, that's too complicated. This is clearly not working again. Let's turn over here to see how we can truly become free. And that's what's so beautiful about this whole thing.
Some people might say that what we're doing is an alternative.
Right.
I guess in the voluntary world, it is an alternative, but I feel in the objective world, it's just a study of that of which is.
It's what is.
And you're inside of an illusion. You think the system works in this way where your body is in this location and the state of California is. None of that's true, though. Objectively.
Right.
Objectively, none of that is true. Objectively.
Right. I know. By their own definitions. Yeah, it's crazy.
So you're moving out of a subjective reality, which is all false. You're living in an illusion. And you're moving into an objective reality.
Exactly.
I feel like you have to have two objective realities to call something an alternative.
Right. Right. Exactly.
It's not really an alternative.
Just like people call it alternative health. It's not alternative health.
Well, that's a psyop.
Yeah,
of course,
100%. But
they make it seem like they're the objective reality, and you're issuing a subjective reality.
Right. Totally.
When actuality, they're the subjective reality, and what you're offering is an objective.
Yeah,
reality.
Exactly. So, it's kind of like when I share in the terrain stuff, and you're like, that literally just sounds like common sense.
Exactly.
Like, exactly.
Exactly.
Man, this is awesome. I want to keep going, but I got to make sure all my stuff doesn't die, my camera batteries. So
no, I'm come back. It's all good.
Okay, awesome. I love you, man. This was awesome.
I love you too,
Thank you so much. This is great.
So many of us dream of buying some land, growing our own food, and becoming self-sufficient away from a society that's gone completely mad. What if it's easier than we think to make that dream a reality? Siblings Jamie and Shelby over at Living the Off-Grid Dream have cracked the code to getting land and living a life of freedom. They'll show you where to find land for $1 down. That's right, $1 down, with low monthly payments, as well as how to structure your vision for a homestead, retreat center, regenerative farm, or community. It's one thing to have food, water, and land security, but it's an entirely different thing to have the financial security to buy the land and build it out in a way that aligns with your goals and aspirations. Their program teaches you how to make enough money on your land to cover all of your costs to make that happen. Plus, they've got you covered with pre-filled out plans to give you inspiration if you're not quite sure what your best move for your land is. And if you're a member of the Way Forward, you get a free one-on-one strategy call with Jamie and Shelby, as well as a free bonus gift. If you want to turn your homesteading, off-grid, or retreat center dreams into a reality, join Living the Off-Grid Dream by clicking the link in the show notes or heading to thewayforward.com/off-grid. In nearly all cases with modern health systems, you're waiting months for appointments only to spend a mere 10 minutes with a doctor who quickly hands out a generic diagnosis that is likely rooted in a total misunderstanding of health and causes, and then you're offered a one-size-fits-all medication or invasive treatments with unpleasant side effects. If this sounds all too familiar, consider a different approach with the New Biology Clinic, founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, a respected natural health doctor, author, and speaker. Dr. Cowan's holistic perspective on health and wellness and a deep understanding of the true nature of health and disease sets this clinic apart. With the New Biology Clinic, it's not about quick fixes and suppressing symptoms. The practitioners take time to understand your unique story, recognizing that health is unique to the individual and that illnesses have a variety of causes, physically and metaphysically. Members of the New Biology Clinic enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. These sessions cover fitness, breathing integration, biofield tuning, guided meditation, EFT tapping, and much more. Unlike traditional healthcare systems that thrive on frequent visits, prescriptions, treatments, and suppressing symptoms, the New Biology Clinic's motivation is to make you healthy and keep you that way. Visit newbiologyclinic.com to learn more and use code THEWAYFORWARD for $50 off your account activation. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com to receive $150 off your account activation. Your journey to genuine healing begins here.